Chapter 553, The Difference of Top-Tier Equipment. How about it? This should be sufficient to convince you to join the War Dragon Legion, right? Martial Dragon asked once again. This time, instead of replying, Fire Dance quietly stared Martial Dragon. Just what kind of monster is this person? Why did I feel that death was right before me when he was still 10 yards away? After undergoing special training for a time, Fire Dance's strength had undergone a qualitative improvement. Lei Bao's training had especially helped her improve her control over her own body. Her senses had become far more sensitive as well. Meanwhile, as Fire Dance stared Martial Dragon, she felt as if she stood before a towering mountain. Particularly, when Martial Dragon was only 10 yards away from her, it felt like that towering mountain had instantly appeared above her and physically pressed down on her. At that very instant, she felt as if her life was no longer under her control. This feeling was different from the pressure she normally felt when facing a powerful enemy. It felt as if everything within a 10-yard radius of Martial Dragon was completely under the Berserker's control. Fire Dance could not believe it. She could not figure out just how Martial Dragon had achieved such a feat. Martial Dragon was clearly a Berserker. Aside from a few specific skills, a Berserker's normal attack range was limited to 5 or 6 yards. Moreover, the Dark God's descent had silenced everyone, and none of them could use any skills. Yet, Martial Dragon had an attack range of 10 yards and could even inflict a feeling of impending doom. Even Fire Dance began to wonder if she was hallucinating due to her fatigue from her recent training. However, ever since she had started playing God's Domain, her senses had not led her astray, so how could she possibly be mistaken now? Hence, Fire Dance immediately retreated from Martial Dragon. However, dragging on this fight was not a solution. After giving it some thought, Fire Dance gritted her teeth as she prepared to test herself against Martial Dragon. In the next moment, Fire Dance transformed into a black shadow as she dashed towards Martial Dragon. In terms of attributes, Fire Dance was confident that she was superior to Martial Dragon for no reason other than the Tier 1 set equipment for assassins, the Dark Melody set equipment, that Shifeng had given her. After equipping this set, not only had her attributes received a massive boost, but she was also able to display her combat power more efficiently. In front of absolute strength, all manner of trickery was useless. Regarding techniques, Fire Dance and the others had already improved significantly due to Lei Bao and Shifeng's training. They could be considered super first-rate experts. In actual combat, they were definitely superior to the ordinary members of the War Dragon Legion. They might not be able to solo a chieftain of the same level, but they could hold their ground against one for a relatively long time. After factoring in the Tier 1 set equipment and their top-tier dark gold weapons, they could easily solo a chieftain of the same level. They could even challenge a lord. After all, a Tier 1 set equipment was only inferior to an epic set equipment. The attribute increase it provided was no small matter. Furthermore, every one of them had equipped 3 intermediate mana armor kits. In terms of attributes, they completely overwhelmed the War Dragon Legion's ordinary members. Even against the commander of the War Dragon Legion, Martial Dragon, this was the case. The instant Fire Dance reached the 10-yard range, she turned her feet slightly, and suddenly she split into 2 identical figures. It was practically impossible to tell which woman was real. The 2 figures then proceeded to attack Martial Dragon separately. Any ordinary player would be caught off guard and fail to react if their enemy suddenly doubled. Even an expert would hesitate. In addition, Fire Dance was very skilled. There were almost no excess movements in her attack. With lightning speed, the 2 true fire blades in Fire Dance's hands flew towards Martial Dragon's vital point and blind spot. The various large guilds watching the fight from afar were momentarily stupefied. Fire Dance's speed and ferocity were unstoppable. Their eyes could not even keep up with her. Even an expert would be finished. However, the instant before the true fire blade struck Martial Dragon, a red streak flashed, deflecting both of Fire Dance's attacks. At the same time, the resulting impact forced Fire Dance into a retreat. Is he even a berserker? How can he draw his sword so fast? Fire Dance was forced to retreat 3 steps before she stabilized her body. At this moment, however, both of her hands were numb. Berserkers were famed for their strength, so Fire Dance did not find it surprising that Martial Dragon's counterattack had repulsed her. However, she was an assassin, a class that was famed for its speed. She had clearly struck first, yet Martial Dragon still managed to block her attacks. This Fire Dance is not bad at all. Unfortunately, the gap between her and Martial Dragon is immense. It is so wide that even she hasn't realized its extent. Watching the fight from afar, Nine Dragons Emperor revealed a faint smile. Pavilion Master, how could you possibly compare that little girl to Martial Dragon? It is impressive that this little girl possesses such skill at such a young age. If she joins the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, her future will be limitless. In a few years she might even become a second Martial Dragon. The old man serving Nine Dragons Emperor similarly smiled. Martial Dragon was one of the strongest combatants that the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion had to offer. He was also a rare talent that only appeared once a decade. The virtual gaming world changed by the day, and every year the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion would recruit a large number of players with potential. Meanwhile, the fact that Martial Dragon was known as a genius that only appeared once every 10 years in the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion showed just how much talent he possessed. How could a little girl who had never been nurtured by a super guild possibly compete with such an individual? Before, although it seemed as though Martial Dragon's block had been extremely fast, in reality, that was not the case. It was only because Fire Dance had failed to notice Martial Dragon taking half a step backward. And it was precisely this distance that had given Martial Dragon's greatsword sufficient time to catch up to Fire Dance's short swords. The subtlety this half-step contained was the difference between Fire Dance and Martial Dragon. Before Fire Dance could recall how Martial Dragon had managed to counterattack, Martial Dragon suddenly moved. The instant he moved, Fire Dance focused all of her attention on the berserker's body. Martial Dragon's movements were very fast and polished. However, this speed was slower than Fire Dance's reactions. In an instant, Fire Dance predicted the berserker's attack route and prepared to counterattack. Since my strength is not a match for him, I'll use speed to face him. Through the previous exchange, Fire Dance had discovered her advantages and disadvantages against this opponent. Assassins possessed extremely high agility. Hence, regarding movement speed, they were leaps and bounds above berserkers. With that in mind, Fire Dance planned to fight a moving battle with Martial Dragon. Fire Dance instantly dodged the attack from Martial Dragon's greatsword. She then sidestepped and sent a strike at the berserker's neck. Evade. Counterattack. It was a simple attack pattern. However, Fire Dance had completed both steps almost simultaneously. Just as Fire Dance considered following up her counterattack with another attack, her complexion suddenly paled as she felt that something was off. When her counterattack landed, she had not felt her blade slice flesh. Unfortunately, it was too late to react. Martial Dragon, who stood proudly before Fire Dance, had raised his blood-red greatsword and swung it down. A red blade of light flashed towards Fire Dance. The immense wind pressure generated by Martial Dragon's greatsword rolled up a cloud of dust along with a splatter of fresh blood. In the next moment, Fire Dance flew back, her HP rapidly falling. Fortunately, Fire Dance had a Tier 1 set equipment and 3 intermediate mana armor kits. In total, she had over 6,000 HP even with her high defense. Although Martial Dragon possessed frightening strength, he could not kill Fire Dance with one hit. He could only reduce her HP by half. Such powerful equipment. Martial Dragon was somewhat surprised when he saw Fire Dance still standing. However, he quickly discerned the reason why he was unable to kill the assassin with a single hit. Equipment capable of allowing an assassin to survive one of his strikes definitely possessed powerful attributes. At this moment, even Martial Dragon envied Fire Dance. Even Nine Dragons Emperor, who watched the battle from afar, glared at Fire Dance enviously. It really is a wonder how you people from Zero Wing manage to obtain such exaggerated equipment. However, although your equipment is excellent, it will only prolong your suffering. Saying so, Martial Dragon advanced once more, swinging his greatsword towards Fire Dance, who had only barely recovered from her fall. Just as the red blade of light was about to strike the assassin. Who? Martial Dragon's hands suddenly froze as his gaze quickly swept through his surroundings. An expert who has awakened a domain is actually bullying a young woman who has yet to even enter the refinement realm. Aren't you ashamed? Chapter 554, Overwhelming Attributes. Although this new voice was not loud, Martial Dragon's sharp gaze immediately locked onto its origin. In the direction Martial Dragon was looking at, a plain-looking man in armor slowly emerged the warring crowd. Despite so many players focusing on killing each other, nobody had bothered to attack this man. It was as if none of these people had noticed him. Everyone was still focused on dealing with their own opponents. Only when this man's black sword pierced through the backs of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's elites, did these elites notice the man's existence. By then, however, it was too late. Since the war had begun, nobody had noticed that this ordinary-looking man had killed many War Dragon Legionnaires and Dragon Phoenix Pavilion elites. He was practically a god of silent death. One hit Azura. Surprise and excitement filled Martial Dragon's eyes as they landed on Shi Feng. Sure enough, your reputation is well deserved. You really do possess some ability. A technique that could allow one to move unnoticed was no trivial matter. The concept might sound very simple, but when it came to its realization, not many could achieve it. This required a combination of special breathing techniques and footwork. Not to mention, Shi Feng even wielded this technique with such ease. Despite having met many experts in the past, Martial Dragon had never encountered one capable of such a technique. One could say that such a technique was extremely convenient in a group battle. Since this technique could allow a player to avoid attention, then it could naturally be used in reverse as well, forcing others to focus on oneself. Martial Dragon had originally intended to finish off Fire Dance with his last attack. However, due to that sudden surge of killing intent from Shi Feng, Martial Dragon felt as if someone had suddenly appeared behind him. Martial Dragon had no choice but to halt his attack in order to respond to the new enemy, allowing Fire Dance to escape with her life as a result. Fire Dance, go deal with someone else. Leave him to me. Shi Feng sent Fire Dance a private message. Guild leader, be careful. Fire Dance nodded. Although Fire Dance was reluctant, she turned and moved to deal with other enemies. Martial Dragon glanced at Fire Dance's departing figure, not bothering to chase after the assassin. Instead, he focused his attention on the slowly approaching Shi Feng. What's going on with Martial Dragon? Fire Dance was within his grasp. Why didn't he finish her off before moving on to deal with Black Flame? Feng Xianyang, who watched the fight from afar, shouted with frustration and confusion. His hatred for Zero Wing ran deep, and he wanted nothing more than to kill Zero Wing's upper managers hundreds of times. If not for Zero Wing, he would not have encountered so many problems. He would have long since become the hidden overlord of Starmoon Kingdom's eastern region rather than ending up in his current dire state. He even had to obey the 7 ghosts. Young Master Feng, Martial Dragon is not at fault here. It isn't because Martial Dragon didn't wish to finish her off, but because he couldn't, Third Ghost said, laughing bitterly. He then explained, Fire Dance is much faster than Martial Dragon. If she focuses on running away, even Martial Dragon cannot catch her. Not to mention, Black Flame has currently locked onto Martial Dragon. If he attempts to chase after Fire Dance, he will reveal a gap in his defense, giving Black Flame an opportunity to attack. Black Flame's combat power is astounding. He is far above Fire Dance. Moreover, that technique that makes others ignore his presence is also the perfect technique for assassinations. If Martial Dragon focused on Fire Dance, it is very likely that he would feel the bite of Black Flame's sword. How could Martial Dragon possibly dare to focus on Fire Dance? Then, are you saying that there is a possibility that Black Flame will defeat Martial Dragon? Resentment boiled up in Feng Xianyang as he listened to Third Ghost's words. In the beginning, Black Flame had been a nobody, insignificant, while he was a member of Underworld. Black Flame had spoiled his good fortune many times, yet, the more he fought Black Flame, the more he discovered how helpless he was against the man. At this point, he could do practically nothing against Black Flame. Chuckling, Third Ghost confidently said, Martial Dragon is very powerful. I only said that Black Flame had a chance against Martial Dragon while he was distracted. However, if Martial Dragon focuses on his opponent, Black Flame has almost no chance of emerging victorious. What do you mean? Feng Xianyang asked curiously. This is something I heard from Boss First Ghost, but it seems that Martial Dragon has already awakened his domain. In a direct confrontation, it is simply impossible to defeat Martial Dragon. Even if we, the 7 ghosts, work together, it is unlikely that we could defeat Martial Dragon in a head-on clash. When Third Ghost uttered the word domain, reverence appeared on his face. Domain. Within a certain range, the wielder of the domain could achieve absolute control. One could even count the number of raindrops that fell in their domain. Only by training one's 5 senses to their extreme limits could one reach such a realm of control. Domains were practically a myth. Normally, only the geniuses among geniuses had the possibility of grasping such a technique. One could say that domains were the dreams that countless experts sought. While Third Ghost explained the situation, Martial Dragon and Shi Feng gradually approached each other. 30 yards, 20 yards, 15 yards. One after another, The upper managers of the various large guilds witnessing this war shifted their gaze towards these two players. One was Starmoon Kingdom's #1 expert, Black Flame, while the other was the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion's top fighter, Martial Dragon. Both were peerless experts that could deter an army by themselves, so how could they possibly miss out on a battle between the two? Guild leader, who do you think will win? Purple Eye asked. Although she was a top-tier expert herself, she had no idea what the outcome of this battle would be, as she had never witnessed either of the two fight with their full power. I suspect Martial Dragon will win. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion is a super first-rate guild. Moreover, you should have seen the strength Martial Dragon displayed a moment ago. That's a domain. Envy and admiration filled Galaxy Past's gaze as he looked at Martial Dragon. Rumor has it that Martial Dragon qualifies to compete with those old monsters, and it would seem that those rumors are true. I wonder when I will be able to set foot on that stage as well. Purple Eye nodded in agreement. In reality, she really hoped that Black Flame would emerge victorious. After all, there had yet to be a single first-rate guild daring enough to provoke the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, yet Black Flame had done just that. One could not help but admire the man. Now he even faced off against a combat genius like Martial Dragon. Unfortunately, Black Flame had yet to reach that stage. Moreover, the difference in the number of experts between Zero Wing and the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was simply too huge. There was no room for Zero Wing to resist. When there was only a distance of 10 yards, Shifeng suddenly stopped. Why aren't you advancing? Martial Dragon stood proudly, his gaze fixed on Shifeng. With a disdainful look, he asked, or do you intend to run away? Shifeng remained silent, paying no heed to Martial Dragon's provocation. Since you aren't going to come to me, I'll go to you. Martial Dragon brandished his greatsword and dashed toward Shifeng like a fierce tiger, his body carrying an overwhelming momentum that pressed down on Shifeng. Yet, Shifeng remained motionless as he welcomed Martial Dragon's attack. Martial Dragon took no time at all to cross the distance of 10 yards. Arriving before Shifeng, Martial Dragon swung his blood-red greatsword, the weapon transforming into a streak of red light as it slashed towards its target. Martial Dragon's attack was both simple and crude. At this time, Shifeng, who had made no effort whatsoever to dodge the oncoming attack, finally moved, the abyssal blade in his hand transforming into a streak of light as it met Martial Dragon's greatsword. Boom! When the two swords clashed, a crisp low-pitched sound echoed throughout the Zero Wing residence. The pure exchange of blows between the two powerhouses caused even the pavement to crack and shatter beneath their feet. Martial Dragon was abruptly forced to retreat by 5 steps, the numbness in his arms spreading to his scalp. Martial Dragon then shifted his gaze to Shifeng, and what he saw left him stupefied. Shifeng stood steady in his original position like an immovable mountain. The difference in their strengths was obvious. Chapter 555, Winner and Loser. Black Flame pushed Martial Dragon back. Silence. Every Dragon Phoenix Pavilion member within Zero Wing's residence was dumbfounded. Meanwhile, the players watching from afar were similarly rendered speechless, their minds repeatedly playing that scene from before. Although neither side had used any profound techniques and had only exchanged a straightforward blow, it was precisely this simplicity that allowed everyone to see the difference between the two very clearly. Shifeng's attributes were absolutely mind-blowing. Shit. Just what kind of equipment is Black Flame wearing? Feng Xuanyang's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets at this scene. Martial Dragon was a level 28 berserker. Moreover, the majority of his equipment was level 25 dark gold equipment. The weapon he wielded was even one of indiscernible quality, but judging from its appearance, it should certainly be above dark gold rank. This equipment composition could definitely be among the very best in God's domain. Even if Black Flame were fully geared in dark gold equipment, he would not be that much stronger than Martial Dragon. Moreover, Black Flame was only a swordsman, a very well-balanced class in terms of attributes. Normally, a swordsman's strength would be inferior to a berserker's, and his agility would be inferior to an assassin's. Yet now, Black Flame had actually managed to force back an apex berserker like Martial Dragon with a single hit. Just how outstanding was Black Flame's equipment to pull off such a feat? At this moment, Nine Dragons' Emperor, who was leisurely watching the battle from afar, had an expression of immense joy on his face, his eyes fully focused on Shifeng, as if he had just seen a peerless beauty. Although Nine Dragons' Emperor was indeed surprised at seeing Martial Dragon forced into a retreat, He was much more delighted at discovering the peerless equipment that made such a feat possible. Uncle Qin, order the ones below to obtain Black Flame's equipment. Nine Dragons Emperor instructed the old man beside him, his eyes shining brightly. Understood. The old man addressed as Uncle Qin immediately made a bow and left his position. A short moment later, the old man arrived with quick steps at the balcony of the private room, then abruptly shouted, "War Dragon Legion, listen up. Plunder every piece of equipment on Black Flame's body and leave nothing behind." Although the old man was quite aged, his voice was extraordinarily loud when he shouted. Practically everyone in the neighborhood had heard him. Is the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion stupid? Didn't they see how Black Flame repulsed Martial Dragon in a single hit? Who could possibly kill him and plunder his equipment? Also, even if they plan on plundering someone's equipment, there shouldn't be a need to announce it publicly like that, right? Some ordinary players spectating from the sidelines ridiculed. When the members of Zero Wing heard the old man's words, they nearly spat out blood in anger. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was completely looking down on them. For a time, Zero Wing's members fought with even greater ferocity. Although the spectating ordinary players made fun of Nine Dragons Emperor's foolishness, none of the upper managers of other first-rate guilds were laughing. They knew full well just how powerful the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was. Despite the currently brief duration of the battle, the death toll was already extremely frightening. The battlefield, which initially had nearly 30,000 players, now had less than 20,000 players remaining. The majority of the survivors also belonged to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Even the War Dragon Legion had over 800 members still alive. Overall, the pavilion's losses were light. In contrast, Zero Wing's side. Things were just terrible on this side. Many elite members had died and only 200 or so Tier 1 players remained. Zero Wing had lost nearly half of its main combat power. If not for the Tier 1 NPCs, Zero Wing's situation would be much uglier. The gap between the two guilds was evident at a single glance. They simply could not be compared to each other. Black Flame repulsing Martial Dragon. What was there to celebrate? These people really think Black Flame has a chance of winning. Third Ghost sneered as he looked at the distant spectating ordinary players. That was the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion Zero Wing was going up against, a super first-rate guild in the virtual gaming world. Moreover, the pavilion had even sent out its War Dragon Legion this time around. Zero Wing had no chance of victory at all. Moreover, Martial Dragon was a peerless expert who had grasped a domain. Although Black Flame had the advantage in attributes, the gap was not so great that it was impassable. Any expert would be able to discern this point very clearly. Hence, Nine Dragons Emperor did not take Black Flame seriously at all and was fully intent on obtaining the swordsman's equipment. Inside Zero Wing's residence, Martial Dragon and Shifeng had already exchanged moves dozens of times. Every time Shifeng attacked, he forced Martial Dragon into a retreat, chipping at Martial Dragon's HP with each exchange. At this moment, Martial Dragon's HP was down to around 90%. However, Shifeng was not particularly happy about this situation, neither was he angry about Nine Dragons Emperor's plan to plunder all his equipment. He only felt helpless. Although Shifeng succeeded in suppressing Martial Dragon with his attributes, the Berserker was, after all, an expert who had grasped a domain. Since Martial Dragon knew that he could not win using brute force, he had gone with a softer approach to neutralize Shifeng's attacks. Negating Shifeng's power was practically impossible for ordinary experts. After all, Shifeng was an expert who had already set foot in the flowing water realm. If one wanted to negate Shifeng's power, they required inhuman levels of precision and confidence. The fact that Martial Dragon could achieve such a feat was all due to his domain. Of course, while Shifeng was helpless against Martial Dragon right now, the same could be said for the Berserker. After all, Shifeng could see through his attack trajectories. Whenever Martial Dragon tried attacking Shifeng, the latter would always take the appropriate defensive measures and force the exchange into a frontal clash between weapons. In a frontal clash, the side with lower strength would naturally receive damage and lose HP. Hence, Martial Dragon could only buy time. However, Martial Dragon was in no rush. Zero Wing was vulnerable. Fire Dance alone could not turn the situation around. This was not an arena. There was no need for players to fight one-on-one. If 3 to 5 legionnaires were insufficient, they could simply increase that number. Even if Fire Dance had powerful attributes, the War Dragon Legion could just treat her as a powerful boss and slowly grind her to death. You are the first person who has lasted this long against me. Unfortunately, this match won't go on for much longer, Martial Dragon said ruefully as he glanced at his surroundings. The number of Zero Wing members still alive was rapidly decreasing. After another 10 minutes or so, this war would come to an end. This outcome was all due to the difference in the number and quality of experts. Even with so many NPCs filling the gap, they were still far from enough. Indeed, this battle will not last much longer. Shifeng's heart ached over this situation as well. The losses Zero Wing had suffered in this war was simply too massive. Yet, instead of revealing a dispirited expression, Shifeng smiled, saying, "However, the victor in this war will still be us, Zero Wing. Do you not see the situation your guild is in right now?" Martial Dragon could not help but laugh when he heard Shifeng's words. However, shortly after Martial Dragon had spoken, the Berserker's expression suddenly turned grave. An ambush? Martial Dragon suddenly felt a killing intent that was even more intense than when Shifeng had revealed himself. Martial Dragon promptly tried to put some distance between Shifeng and himself. However, Shifeng did not allow Martial Dragon to do so, sticking closely to the Berserker at all times. In terms of speed, Martial Dragon was simply no match for Shifeng. Just as Martial Dragon faced Shifeng's barrage of attacks, the shadow of a figure suddenly appeared behind Martial Dragon. Scram! Martial Dragon had already been on his guard against this figure. Tightening his grip on his greatsword, he swung the weapon towards his back with all his might, the weapon itself transforming into a streak of red light. Under normal circumstances, this sudden attack definitely would have caught the player, who had appeared behind Martial Dragon, by surprise. Dang! However, this red blade of light was easily blocked. "You are..." Martial Dragon finally managed to get a clear look at the ambusher and was stunned. This man had gray hair and a tall, robust body that was significantly larger than an ordinary person's. Also, this man was not a player but an NPC. Although this NPC was only level 40, lower than those level 50 tier 1 guards, the pressure Martial Dragon felt from him was even stronger than what he'd felt from a High Lord. However, Martial Dragon had no time to ponder the identity of this NPC, because the moment this NPC swung his sword, over a dozen wind blades flew at Martial Dragon from all sides. Only Shifeng knew what this skill was. Tier 2 sword skill, Wind Roar. This skill could not be blocked and could only be dodged. But Martial Dragon no longer had time to dodge right now. In the blink of an eye, multiple wind blades devoured Martial Dragon, his 6,000 plus HP instantly bottoming out with not a single point remaining. The ambusher was none other than Shifeng's personal guard, Kite. Only at this moment, Kite had already recovered his original strength. No longer was he a tier 1 swordsman but a tier 2 sword master instead. Chapter 556, Might of a Sword Master. He actually died just like that. That's Martial Dragon. How could someone possibly kill him with one hit? When did that frightening NPC appear? For a time, the upper managers of the various guilds spectating the battle were stupefied. Commander. Martial Dragon's abrupt death stopped the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion members' rising momentum cold. As the commander of the War Dragon Legion, Martial Dragon had never died, not even once, ever since he entered God's domain. Not even Hell Mode Team Dungeons could end his life. The elites of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and the members of the War Dragon Legion all admired Martial Dragon greatly, using him as their role model. One could say that Martial Dragon was the symbol of the War Dragon Legion, as well as the Legion's backbone. Now that their backbone suddenly disappeared, even the members of the War Dragon Legion were dumbfounded. They had never once thought that Martial Dragon would die. As if adding insult to injury, he was a casualty in a war of annihilation against a small guild. That damnable Black Flame. He actually has another hidden trump card. A chilling light flashed across Nine Dragons Emperor's eyes as he glared at Shifeng. However, even if you have the help of a level 40 tier 2 NPC, you will all still perish today. Uncle Chin, head into the battlefield with Blood Dragon. Do not let Black Flame get away at all costs. The same goes for that tier 2 NPC. Martial Dragon was renowned throughout the entire virtual gaming world. He was practically synonymous with the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and was also the proof of the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion's strength. Yet now, Martial Dragon had actually been killed in a war with a minor guild like Zero Wing. If news of this matter were to spread, the damage to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's reputation would be severe. At this moment, the only way to redeem the pavilion's reputation was to thoroughly consign Zero Wing to history and have everyone know what the consequences were for angering the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Presently, Zero Wing had only a small number of members left alive. On the other hand, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion suffered only minimal losses among its main experts. Although a Tier 2 NPC was mighty, fortunately it was just a level 40 NPC, roughly equivalent to a level 40 Lord. With the number of experts in the War Dragon Legion, they could easily defeat a level 40 Lord. Understood. The old man addressed as Uncle Chin bowed and departed. From an outsider's point of view, this Uncle Chin was only a butler of Nine Dragons Emperor. However, every upper manager in the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion knew that this old man with a head full of white hair was not just Nine Dragons Emperor's butler. He was the third person to command the War Dragon Legion, Dust Dragon. However, this detail was something in the annals of history. Currently, most people had long since forgotten that this elderly man named Uncle Chen was the almighty Dust Dragon of the past. When the War Dragon Legion received the command, they immediately went into a frenzy. They no longer bothered targeting the elites of Zero Wing. Instead, hundreds of them encircled Shifeng and Kite. Every one of these hundreds of experts was level 27 or above, and they all wore top-tier equipment. Moreover, at this level, most players had at least some equipment with the Ignore Levels attribute. In other words, members of the War Dragon Legion would not have to worry about level suppression when fighting Kite, a level 40 NPC. Normally, the War Dragon Legion members could trounce a level 40 Field Lord with just a single 20-man team. Meanwhile, hundreds of them were present right now. Blood Dragon, a branch leader of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, and Dust Dragon, a former commander of the War Dragon Legion, were even leading the Legionnaires personally. Even if the enemy was a level 40 High Lord, they could still defeat it. Ah, Black Flame is doomed for sure this time. Rather than dealing a blow to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's momentum, he has instead angered the pavilion even more. Feng Xianyang could not help but chortle when he saw this scene. Not only is he surrounded by so many top-tier experts, but he also can't use any of his skills. If we 7 ghosts were in such a situation, we would still face annihilation even if all of us worked together, Third Ghost commented. Everyone had originally been fearful of Martial Dragon already. Now that they saw this scene, they finally realized just how powerful the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's true strength is simply too powerful. It really isn't something we first-rate guilds can hope to contend with. It seems that I'll have to make some changes to our future development plans. Galaxy Past felt helpless as he looked at the tightly packed members of the War Dragon Legion. Top-tier experts were individuals that large guilds would only rarely encounter. Yet, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion actually managed to dispatch 1,000 of them. With such power, who could possibly oppose the pavilion? Galaxy Past had even visualized the Star Alliance being in Zero Wing's place right now. In the end, he concluded that the Star Alliance would not fare any better than Zero Wing. In other words, not to mention the Phoenix Pavilion of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, just the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion alone was enough to annihilate the Star Alliance. The gap between a first-rate guild and a super first-rate guild was simply hopeless. Guild leader, look. Black Flame has begun taking action. Purple Eye, who was standing beside Galaxy Past, recalled him to the battle at hand. Zero Wing's destruction was inevitable. The only thing worth watching now was seeing how many experts of the War Dragon Legion Black Flame would manage to kill. As for escaping, that was practically impossible. As the guild leader, if Black Flame abandoned his own guild residence to escape, he would only turn himself into a laughingstock. His only option now was to fight till the bitter end. Either he survived by forcing his enemies to retreat, or he perished along with his guild residents. There was no third option. Without hesitation, Shifeng, along with Kite, dashed directly towards the oncoming army of experts. They did not bother taking a roundabout route to conduct guerrilla warfare. Has this Black Flame lost his mind? Galaxy Past watched Shifeng's movement patterns with utter bewilderment. When the enemy had the advantage in numbers, one would normally apply hit-and-run tactics to avoid letting their enemies completely surround them. Applying such guerrilla tactics would yield tremendous results, especially when one's combat power was significantly superior to the enemy's. However, Shifeng had actually taken the initiative to charge into the enemy's encirclement. He was simply trying to get himself killed. Since you wish to die, let me grant you that wish. Blood Dragon revealed a sinister sneer. Back when the curse scrolls were used, he had been outside the effective radius of Dark God's descent. Hence, when Blood Dragon was only 30 yards away from Shifeng, he immediately activated Charge. He then raised his sword, activating Heavy Chop as he swung the weapon at Shifeng. Meanwhile, Dust Dragon, who was a short distance away, had similarly used Charge. He had timed his skill perfectly so that he would arrive just a moment later than Blood Dragon, preventing Shifeng from blocking both of their attacks. In God's domain, although a person might seem old, their bodies in the game remained strong. Hence, there was not much of a difference between Dust Dragon's current combat power and his combat power back when he was still in his prime. On the contrary, his combat experience far surpassed the ordinary person's. He was like a living fossil of the virtual gaming world. He had long since reached the realm of perfection in the control and usage of techniques. Looking to die? Shifeng could not help but smile when he looked at the two people swiftly approaching him. Kite was no ordinary NPC. He was a dark gold ranked personal guard, and he could easily beat up a player of the same level and tier. When Kite was still a tier 1 swordsman, he was already capable of contending against a high lord of the same level. Contending against higher levels might be a different story, but with his strength back to that of a tier 2 sword master, he could even go toe-to-toe with a level 40 Great Lord now. What did a level 40 Great Lord hint at? The final boss of a level 20 100-man Hell Mode team dungeon was only a level 20 Great Lord. But there had yet to be a single person daring enough to go challenge such a monster even until now. Out in the fields, a level 40 Great Lord would annihilate a 1,000-man team of level 40 players, not to mention a 100-man team. Meanwhile, the War Dragon Legion consisted of only several hundred players. Moreover, none of them was even close to reaching level 40 yet. They also did not possess any level 40 top-tier equipment. Yet they still dared to come charging over. Their recklessness left Shifeng speechless. If he truly had to describe them, he would say that they were remarkably courageous. The moment Blood Dragon and Dust Dragon came rushing over, Kite moved in front of Shifeng. The sword master then swung his sword down at the two aggressors. Instantly, dozens of wind blades struck both Blood Dragon and Dust Dragon from all sides. In the blink of an eye, both berserkers were lying on the ground already dead. Chapter 557, Qualifications to become an Overlord. What kind of NPC is this? Nine Dragons Emperor shot up from his seat the instant he saw Blood Dragon and Dust Dragon instant killed. An expression of shock plastered over his face. Nobody had a better understanding than he did of Blood Dragon's and Dust Dragon's strengths. Although the two of them were not a match for Martial Dragon, no one was likely to be a match for them when the two of them were working together. Even a level 40 High Lord would not be able to kill both of them in a single strike. The only possibility was that this NPC was too powerful, so powerful that players simply had no way of resisting him. Kite, kill them all. Leave none alive. Shifeng no longer held back. He immediately commanded Kite to begin his slaughter. In the past, Kite was titled the Windbreaker. In the entire God's domain, very few personal guards possessed a title. The title itself, though, was only a title. It did not provide any bonus attributes or contribute to the improvement of the personal guard's combat power. However, having a title signified that an NPC was not an ordinary class but a hidden class. Some hidden classes were weak while some were strong. Windbreaker definitely ranked within the peak classes. In addition, as a personal guard, Kite himself also possessed frightening growth potential. Hence, Kite had become practically invincible when going up against an enemy of the same level and tier in the past. Back in the days, the lifestyle player that owned Kite had relied on this personal guard to become an existence that nobody in God's domain could ignore. Even super guilds did not wish to offend this lifestyle player casually. What about now? Back then, even a lifestyle player had managed to nurture Kite into a tier 5 sword saint capable of overwhelming any tier 5 player or NPC. Meanwhile, in this life, Shifeng was the one nurturing Kite. Not only could Shifeng provide greater financial support, but Kite's current growth potential was also higher than what he had in the past. Now, dealing with players of a lower level and tier was practically child's play to Kite. After Kite received Shifeng's command, he transformed into a fierce gale that swept across the members of the War Dragon Legion. The shield warriors and guardian knights of the War Dragon Legion hurriedly dashed to the forefront, attempting to block Kite's assault. Unfortunately for them, Kite was just too fast. With a simple leap, he arrived behind the shield warriors and guardian knights. He then used a tier 2 skill, Wind Ferret, sending all players within 30 yards flying up into the air. In the next moment, Kite began brandishing his swords, shooting hundreds of wind blades outwards like a lotus flower that pierced the bodies of the players suspended in midair. Even though these players were shield warriors and guardian knights, their HP still fell by the thousands. In the blink of an eye, their 6,000 or 7,000 HPs bottomed out, though a fortunate few managed to survive Kite's barrage of attacks. However, as they were too high up in the air when they landed on the ground, the fall took away their last strand of HP. In just a moment, the War Dragon Legion had lost dozens of members. Seeing this scene where players fell to the ground like dumplings, one after another, everyone was utterly stupefied. Nobody had imagined that a Tier 2 NPC could actually be this mighty. Moreover, aside from him being strong, even Kite's combat techniques were more powerful than those of many experts. The Windbreaker is indeed amazing. It is no wonder he was able to deal with so many Tier 5 players as if they were little children in the past. Only Tier 6 God rank players were able to suppress him. Shi Feng was delighted with Kite's performance. When it came to techniques, there were indeed players that could surpass Kite. Unfortunately, the precondition for this victory was that said player was similar to Martial Dragon, a peerless expert who had achieved 100% control over his own body. However, even in the entire God's domain, such experts were as rare as a phoenix's feather. Moreover, even if a player was superior to Kite in terms of combat techniques, as an NPC, Kite could completely overwhelm any player when it came to attributes. In front of absolute strength, all manner of trickery was useless. In the end, the amount of strength a player could display through their techniques was limited. It was just like how Shi Feng, despite his techniques being inferior to Martial Dragon's, was able to suppress the Berserker by relying on his attributes. Only in Kite's case the NPC could trounce Martial Dragon, because Kite's attributes were leaps and bounds above even Shi Feng's. Such great strength was already beyond Martial Dragon's ability to withstand. Hence, Kite was able to kill Martial Dragon easily while Shi Feng could not. In just a moment, Zero Wing had made a complete comeback from their previously disadvantaged situation. To the War Dragon Legion, which had a member count of only 1,000, having more than 100 of its experts killed was a significant loss. Most importantly, its casualties continued to increase. Despite Nine Dragons Emperor's attempts to pin down Kite by sending more elite players and experts, all his efforts were in vain. With Kite's speed, strength, and techniques, any player that had yet to attain their Tier 2 class would not even have the qualifications to delay him. Otherwise, the many first-rate guilds and super guilds in the past would not have feared him so much. Seeing how Kite was casually slaughtering the members of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, the spectating upper managers of the various large guilds were dumbfounded. With such an NPC guarding their guild residence, no guild is capable of threatening Zero Wing. Galaxy Past muttered as he looked at Kite. He then shifted his gaze towards Shi Feng, who was leisurely observing the battle from the sidelines, his eyes filled with both admiration and envy. Although the status of a first-rate guild might seem preeminent, in reality, there was a massive gap between a first-rate guild and a super guild. If the Star Alliance managed to anger a super guild in the future, a repeat of today's scene was highly likely. However, if the Star Alliance had an NPC like Kite guarding its guild residence at that time, it would possess the qualifications to pick a fight with a super guild. Although they still could not afford to provoke a super guild, they would no longer have to live in fear like they currently did. As long as a guild's residence remained, and as long as the guild still possessed a large sum of funds and coins, then it would be a cockroach that would not die. In the virtual gaming world, it was not the powerful who were considered strong. Instead, it was those who managed to survive and was not afraid of any enemy that were deemed to be strong. After all, only by surviving would there be hope. It was just like how those super guilds had managed to survive until now. In the past, there were far more powerful existences than these super guilds. Yet, in the end, didn't they end up failing as well? Meanwhile, although Zero Wing was still weak right now, it already possessed the qualifications to become an overlord in God's domain. Hence, how could Galaxy Past not admire Shi Feng? Purple, once we return, immediately mobilize the entire guild. Our Star Alliance needs an NPC like that as well. Galaxy Past's eyes were filled with desire as he looked at Kite. Amicho. Purple Eye silently nodded in agreement. However, instead of looking at Kite, she was currently focused on Aqua Rose. At this moment, her eyes were filled with mixed feelings. Time slowly passed by. The battlefield grew more intense with each passing moment. Currently, only a small number of players from Zero Wing remained alive. As for the guild's most precious Tier 1 players, less than 100 remained alive. This time, however, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was not having a good time either. Due to Kite's appearance, coupled with Shi Feng silently helping out his guild mates, the War Dragon Legion's numbers fell sharply. Currently, less than 400 legionnaires remained alive. Retreat. All of you retreat. Nine Dragons Emperor sent a command to the members of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, no longer able to stomach this battle. Pavilion Master, Zero Wing is about to be destroyed. Are we really going to retreat right now? Rage had long since overwhelmed many of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's upper managers fighting in the battlefield. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's prestige and reputation were also at stake here. How could they possibly be willing to retreat at a time like this? I said retreat. Are you unable to understand that? Nine Dragons Emperor suddenly said in a low tone, his gloomy voice chilling even his surroundings. Nine Dragons Emperor wanted to continue fighting this war as well. He even wished he could personally step onto the battlefield. However, he was a guild leader. He needed to consider the bigger picture. Although their side still seemed to possess the numerical advantage, in reality, they were already at a disadvantage. If this situation continued, instead of Zero Wing being destroyed, they would be the ones facing complete annihilation. In order to cut their losses, they had no choice but to retreat right now. Understood. Retreat. All members retreat. The members of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion could only sigh in dejection. Under the command of the upper managers, they swiftly withdrew from Zero Wing's guild residence. Chapter 558, After the War. 1. We won. Everyone from Zero Wing was incomparably excited, and they all began cheering loudly one after another. Throughout this entire war, nobody had expected them to win. Even the large guilds watching from afar had long since made preparations to take advantage of Zero Wing's misfortune. Originally, other than super guilds, nobody else dared to oppose the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. However, they had dared. Moreover, they had even defeated the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. They had achieved a feat that no guild had ever imagined was possible. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was actually defeated just like that. The various large guilds spectating this battle fell silent. Other than shock, everyone felt amazement. Despite the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's overwhelming power, in the end, all those elite players and frightening top-tier experts suffered defeat at the hands of a single NPC guard. After we return, we must focus on developing our guild's guards. Galaxy Past had an excited expression on his face as he watched the retreating members of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. The true strength of a super guild was something no ordinary guild could ever hope to comprehend. Only first-rate guilds like them would know some secrets about super guilds. Although the opponent Zero Wing had defeated this time was not a super guild, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's strength was already on a par with those super guilds. Since Zero Wing could repel the attack of the pavilion, it could naturally repel the attacks of super guilds as well. Most likely, nobody in the entire God's domain had thought that. The first guild capable of going toe-to-toe with the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion would not be a first-rate guild but a recently established guild like Zero Wing instead. However, this was still not the most exciting part. The most exciting part was that Zero Wing had shown everyone present the hope of contending against a super guild. In virtual reality games, the result of a war between guilds usually depended on players. However, God's domain was different. Here, NPC guards could also determine the outcome of a guild war. In other words, the advantage a super guild possessed was no longer an insurmountable hurdle. If a guild's players could not repel an attack, they could just fill the gap using NPCs. At this moment, Galaxy Past wasn't the only one planning to focus on nurturing his guild's NPC guards. The upper managers of the various large guilds had also grasped this point. They all had the notion of developing their NPCs once they returned. As long as their guild residences had an NPC like Kite protecting it, then their guild residences would be impregnable. That way they could disregard those powerful super guilds. They could develop their guilds however they pleased. Although the members of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion were swiftly withdrawing, Shi Feng had no intention of letting them off the hook. Instead, he immediately expanded on his victory, killing as many as pavilion members as he could. Every player present was an elite or above. The quality of the equipment they wore on their bodies went without saying. Each additional death was equivalent to obtaining another piece of good equipment. During the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's withdrawal, Shi Feng and Kite managed to kill several hundred more players, obtaining a bountiful harvest, particularly of the life force points Shifeng collected. Damn it. Nine Dragons Emperor's heart bled when he saw his guild's elites and the experts of the War Dragon Legion dying one after another. Black Flame, just you wait. Sooner or later I will definitely claim this debt. You won't be as lucky the next time we meet. After the war ended, Zero Wing's members also began collecting their spoils of war. Both guilds had suffered an immense death toll in this war. However, during the intense battle, nobody had the time to pick up loot. Hence, plenty of equipment littered the ground right now. This sight stirred greed and jealousy in many of the spectating guilds. However, not a single guild player dared to steal some equipment for themselves. The same held true even for the assassins who were in stealth. A large number of NPCs still stood guard near these drops, and everyone had already witnessed just how powerful these NPCs were. Naturally, nobody wanted to donate their own equipment to Zero Wing. At the same time, word of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's defeat spread at the speed of light. Practically all the discussions on the official forums mentioned this incident. It can't be right? The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion actually lost? You must be joking. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion really lost. I have first-hand video documentation here, and you can have it for just 50 credits. A majority of the players in God's domain was incredulous of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's defeat. The pavilion, which had remained unshakable all this time, had actually been defeated. It was a rout. Even the pavilion's most powerful War Dragon Legion had lost over half of its members. The damage the pavilion had suffered this time was simply incalculable. Starmoon City, inside Ouroboros's guild residence. Snow, Zero Wing actually won against the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, just like you guessed it would. Zhao Yueru's unblemished face was full of surprise when she received the latest news regarding the war between Zero Wing and the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. There's nothing surprising about this, Gentle Snow said, a bright smile appearing on her face. Black Flame is no fool. Moreover, he has never done anything he was not confident about. Since he dared to pick a fight with the pavilion, he naturally had basis for his confidence. Only, I never imagined that the source of his confidence would be so powerful. We're in luck this time. Since we're allies with Zero Wing, those elders whom Chao Qinghua is planning to pull to his side will have to carefully reconsider their actions. Zhao Yueru laughed. Moments after Zhao Yueru said these words, the doors to the meeting room opened, and a few gorgeously dressed middle-aged men and women entered. Seeing the arrival of these few people, Gentle Snow could not help but smile bitterly as she shook her head. Fate truly knows how to toy with people. These men and women were none other than Ouroboros's few highly skilled and influential elders. Normally, these elders paid little heed to the matters of the guild, focusing only on grinding, leveling up, and raiding dungeons. Even Chao Qinghua dared not offend these elders casually. Previously, Gentle Snow had tried inviting these elders for a discussion on some matters. However, they had simply ignored her overtures. Now, without even requiring her invitation, these people had taken the initiative to come looking for her. This situation left Gentle Snow speechless. Back then, she had only decided to become Zero Wing's ally to repay her debt to Black Flame. Now, however, it would seem that she was growing even more beholden to him instead. Guild Leader Snow, we truly apologize for before. The few of us have been busy raiding dungeons all this time, so we failed to meet up with you. Now, however, we are already clear on the guild situation. The few of us here have unanimously decided to support you fully. If Chao Qinghua dares to try to split up Ouroboros, he will have to go through us first before he can do so, the leading shield warrior declared, chuckling. Now that Zero Wing had defeated the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, a super first-rate guild, its fame and status in God's domain were naturally far different from before. Prior to Zero Wing's appearance, the upper managers of various large guilds were secretly doing their best to forge connections with super guilds to increase their authority inside their own guilds. Many large guilds had even taken the initiative to curry favor with super guilds to obtain the protection of these super guilds. That way, if other guilds wanted to make a move on them, these guilds would have to think twice before taking action against them. After all, nobody wished to incur the anger of a super guild. Meanwhile, now that Zero Wing had defeated the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, the consequences were obvious. In the future, Zero Wing might very well become another super first-rate guild. When a man became powerful, those near him could ride on his coattails to success as well. Since Gentle Snow was an ally of Zero Wing, that meant that Gentle Snow had the support of what amounted to a super first-rate guild. As long as one was not a fool, they would know which side they should choose. White River City, Zero Wings residence. Guild leader, I've already tallied up the results of the war. Here are the statistics, Aqua Rose said, a smile on her face as she handed over a list of data to Sherfeng. How could there be so many? We've really made a fortune this time. The corners of Sherfeng's lips twitched slightly when he looked at the list. Chapter 559, Growing Stronger. The number of equipment on the statistical list exceeded 20,000. Most of the equipment originally belonged to the Zero Wing members who had participated in the war, so those had to be returned. In addition, they had to take into account the reward for killing enemy players as well as death subsidies. However, even after deducting all the necessary expenses, they still had over 5,000 pieces of equipment remaining. Initially, Sherfeng thought Zero Wing would only gain a slight profit from this war. After all, Zero Wing's army of over 10,000 elites had practically suffered complete annihilation. Only a few hundred elites remained alive at the end of the war. As for the Tier 1 core members, only several dozens survived. The compensation for the losses of over 10,000 elite members and hundreds of core members was astronomical. Having a surplus of more than 5,000 pieces of equipment surpassed Sherfeng's expectations entirely. We are fortunate that the pavilion members' equipment is of excellent quality, unlike the previous battles we fought before when there were barely enough spoils of war to go around, even though our losses were not significant back then. At this moment, Aqua Rose was overjoyed. The guilds they had fought in the past were much poorer compared to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. The enemy guilds back then consisted mostly of ordinary players, with only a small number of elite players. The equipment they could drop was naturally of low quality. Bronze and mysterious iron equipment was considered top-tier goods for those guilds. Now, however, the enemies they had killed were the elites and experts of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Naturally, the items they dropped were on an entirely different level in terms of quality. The majority of the equipment worn by the pavilion's elite members was level 20 secret silver equipment, with the weakest being level 20 mysterious iron equipment, and the strongest being level 20 fine gold equipment. As for the members of the War Dragon Legion, all the equipment they wore was level 25, with the majority being level 25 fine gold equipment, and the weakest being level 25 secret silver equipment. A few legionnaires even had level 25 dark gold equipment. Naturally, the items they dropped were astounding. Currently, level 20 bronze equipment was being sold for around 20 silver. Even mysterious iron equipment sold for around 40 silver only. However, the prices for secret silver equipment was a different story altogether. With the difference of just one rank, the price increased from around 40 silver straight up to around 90 silver. If it were secret silver equipment meant for MTs, the price would go further, up to 1 gold 20 silver. This disparity was mainly due to the sheer difficulty in obtaining secret silver equipment. In level 20 6-man party dungeons, even at Hell mode, there was only a fixed chance for secret silver equipment to drop. Only 10-man Hell mode team dungeons would drop secret silver equipment with 100% certainty, with a small chance of dropping fine gold equipment. Most players in God's Domain were just beginning to raid level 20 10-man team dungeons, and the number of teams that could raid Hell mode was very low. With a tight supply of level 20 secret silver equipment, it was only natural for prices to be a lot higher. As for level 20 fine gold equipment, its prices were even more inflated. Each piece of such equipment sold for at least 4 gold. Normally, only 20-man Hell mode team dungeons would drop fine gold equipment with 100% certainty. Meanwhile, there was only a fixed chance for one to drop in hard mode. Hence, fine gold equipment was much rarer, and its price much higher. If level 20 equipment was already like this, there was no need to mention level 25 equipment. For equipment, although an increase in 1 rank was equivalent to an increase in 5 levels, level 25 secret silver equipment was much more expensive than level 20 fine gold equipment. At present, each piece sold for 5 gold or more. Moreover, the supply of level 25 secret silver equipment on the market was extremely limited. People usually circulated such equipment within their own inner circles, and players would have to rely on their connections to purchase one. As for level 25 fine gold equipment, they were considered the best equipment currently available in God's Domain. Setting aside the fact that nobody would sell such equipment in the first place, if there were some available for sale, the price would be at least 15 gold. Currently, among the 5,000 plus pieces of equipment in Sherfeng's hands, There were over 2,000 pieces of level 20 mysterious iron equipment and over 2,000 pieces of level 20 secret silver equipment. As for the remainder, over 600 pieces were level 20 fine gold equipment, over 400 were level 25 secret silver equipment, over 150 were level 25 fine gold equipment, and a total of 12 pieces were level 25 dark gold equipment. If converted to coins, all this equipment would be worth more than 10,000 gold. After fighting a single war, Zero Wing had made a pure profit of over 10,000 gold. Any guild would be celebrating after such a harvest. Not to mention, even if a guild had 10,000 gold, it would not be able to obtain so many pieces of equipment. If a guild wished to develop quickly, other than having experts leading its members, it was also essential to have equipment in the guild's warehouse. The amount of equipment a guild possessed determined the number of members it could sustain. Now that Shifeng had received such a huge influx of equipment, he could definitely advance Zero Wing further, absorbing even more members into the guild. Guild leader, should I place the equipment into the guild's warehouse? Aquarose asked. Organize them and place the ones with good attributes into the guild's warehouse. Hand over the remainder to Melancholic for sale, Shifeng instructed after giving her question some thought. A majority of the current players had already reached level 20 or above. Those who hadn't reached level 20 were either new to God's domain, or just ordinary lifestyle players. Meanwhile, all the elite members in Zero Wing were level 25 or above, whereas ordinary members were either level 23 or level 24. Hence, their demand for level 20 equipment was not particularly high. Level 20 equipment was currently considered mainstream equipment in God's domain. Its popularity just happened to be at its peak. After more time passed, level 20 equipment would grow obsolete and lose its value. Hence, now was the best time to sell their excess equipment and maximize their profit. Currently, the candlelight trading firm continued to expand every day. However, the variety of goods the firm sold was still insufficient. There was a limit to the number of players the firm could attract just by relying on the intermediate mana armor kits and light stones. Only when the firm could sell good equipment in large quantities would it truly be able to hold its ground in Starmoon Kingdom. In Shifeng's previous life, many trading firms would sell the bronze, mysterious iron, secret silver, fine gold and even dark gold equipment produced by its forgers. Only by following that example could the candlelight trading firm maintain its shop's competitiveness. Soon after, Shifeng logged out of the game to rest. Time passed slowly. On the day after the great battle, the atmosphere surrounding White River City was no longer oppressive like before, and many players on the streets had begun talking about yesterday's war. Damn. I can't believe that, while I was at work during the day, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was actually defeated. I know, right? Zero Wing is OP now. If even a super first-rate guild is helpless against it, it would be even more impossible for other guilds. It is a huge pity that you did not get to watch that battle. That Dragon Phoenix Pavilion really deserves its title as a super first-rate guild. The number of experts they sent over yesterday could easily overwhelm any first-rate guild. However, Zero Wing still came out on top. Nobody could have imagined that they actually had such a powerful NPC guard. That one NPC killed hundreds of top-tier experts all by himself. My eyes nearly fell out when I saw that scene back then. Now that Zero Wing has defeated the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, it will definitely become even more powerful in the future. I heard that Zero Wing has begun mass recruitment again. I failed their test the last time. I wonder if I can pass it this time? Previously, I thought about trying to join a super guild. Now, however, it seems that there won't be a need to do so. I'll go with you to apply for the test. The independent players filling the streets and alleyways of White River City talked fervently about Zero Wing, a fire of anticipation burning in their eyes. These players felt proud just thinking about residing in the same city as Zero Wing, a guild capable of contending against the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Compared to those flamboyant first-rate guilds, Zero Wing was far more powerful. In reality, such a reaction wasn't limited to just the players of White River City. The independent players of many other cities, other kingdoms even, began migrating to White River City one after another, every one of them hoping to join Zero Wing. In just half a day's time, Zero Wing completely recovered to its original strength. The number of elite players Zero Wing had right now was even higher than before the war with the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Chapter 560 Times have changed. Normally, the guilds involved in a guild war would have to undergo a protracted recovery before they could regain their peak. However, after Zero Wing's miraculous victory over the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, its prestige throughout the entire Star Moon Kingdom soared. At this moment, not even the few first-rate guilds based in Star Moon Kingdom were a match for it. As a result, a large number of independent players swarmed to White River City in order to join Zero Wing. In no time at all, Zero Wing went from being an ordinary guild with 50,000 members to a large guild with over 80,000 members. Moreover, this was after Zero Wing increased the difficulty of its recruitment test. Most importantly, this number was still rising rapidly with no signs of slowing down at all. Zero Wing's development speed rendered the various large guilds in Star Moon Kingdom speechless. Currently, Zero Wing could already be described using the term overcrowded. All of this was a result of Zero Wing's future becoming limitless. Previously, although Zero Wing had attracted quite a lot of attention due to its various feats, at the end of the day, it was merely another small guild that was a dime a dozen in God's domain. It was an existence that would disappear in an instant should it accidentally anger a large guild. Hence, when independent players were choosing a guild to join, the first ones they would consider were definitely those large guilds instead of Zero Wing. Now, however, the situation had changed. Firstly, Zero Wing was already an existence that did not need to fear any other guild. Secondly, the treatment and benefits Zero Wing provided surpassed even those of first-rate guilds. Thirdly, there were all sorts of top-tier equipment available in the guild's warehouse. Just looking at the wide array of equipment would make one drool. Not to mention, the guild residents also had a large number of private rooms available for rent. Whether it was in terms of leveling speed or equipment upgrading speed, Zero Wing was much faster than every other guild. With so many advantages, everyone would naturally hope to join Zero Wing. Aren't you guys being too arrogant? You defeated the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's raid only once. Among the large number of independent teams out there, the combat power of our Flying Eagles team is definitely ranked above average. We will be highly valued even if we join a first-rate guild. Yet, now that we are trying to join Zero Wing, only 2 of the 10 of us managed to pass your test. Aren't you looking down on us a little too much? A level 24 Guardian Knight demanded angrily. That's right. We hurried over to this place from far away and have spent a lot of money on teleportation fees, all because we want to join Zero Wing. Can't you lower the difficulty of the test by just a little bit? A level 23 Ranger complained. At the recruitment hall inside Zero Wing's residence, many players were voicing their discontent over Zero Wing's recruitment test. This situation was giving Aqua Rose a huge headache as well. She could not understand why Shifeng suddenly decided to raise the requirements despite these already being very high before, even higher than those of first-rate guilds. Yet now Shifeng raised that bar even further. He was practically trying to drive players away from the guild. Guild leader, there are countless guilds in God's domain, and all of them are frantically trying to recruit members. Now that we have defeated the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, we have the perfect opportunity to develop quickly. If we don't take this chance to recruit a large number of players while we are still popular, it won't be as easy to do so in the future. Can't you lower the conditions a little? Aqua Rose asked. Most of the players who had come from other cities were relatively skilled players back in their own cities. However, in order to better develop themselves, they had come all the way to White River City specifically to join Zero Wing. One could say that these players were the cream of the crop of other cities, and rejecting them right now would be such a pity. I won't change this condition no matter what. Besides, I didn't invite them over, they came of their own free will. In any case, the condition is there. Once they pass it, they can naturally join the guild. If they fail, there is nothing we can do about it. Zero Wing's resources are limited. Our guild isn't a garbage collection station. Moreover, Zero Wing is taking the path of the elite. There is no meaning in recruiting in bulk. Shifeng showed no signs of regret at all. Slowly he explained, you have seen it for yourself. During the war with the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, the War Dragon Legion nearly annihilated all our elites. If we did not have a large number of NPC guards to assist us, the War Dragon Legion might have wiped us out. Hence, what we need to do now is not to increase the number of members we have but to improve the quality of our members. Aqua Rose fell silent upon hearing Shifeng's words. The gap between the two sides in that war was simply too vast. Not to mention the War Dragon Legion, even the standard of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's elite members was significantly higher than Zero Wing's. Had the gap been smaller, Zero Wing would not have suffered such massive losses. Indeed, my mind must have been clouded before. I'll carry out your orders immediately then. After Shifeng's lecture, Aqua Rose finally realized that she'd had her head in the clouds out of joy from their victory. Zero Wing had always been taking the path of the elite. It was precisely because of this that the guild's members managed to improve their strength so quickly. Despite having only 50,000 members, there were over 13,000 elite members in the guild. This was a very frightening ratio. Moreover, Zero Wing's success in developing from a small guild with only several thousand members to a guild with more elite members than even a second-rate guild was all because every guild member received a significant share of the guild's resources. Following which, Shifeng handed over all Zero Wing-related matters to Aqua Rose while he went to his forging room in the candlelight trading firm. The demand for intermediate mana armor kits was just too high. The kits he had made several days ago were nearly sold out now, so he had to replenish the inventory immediately. During this period of time, Shifeng had been constantly busy developing the candlelight trading firm, so he did not have time to do anything else. Notably, the time limit for his epic quest, Darkness Descends, was nearly up. Fortunately, the candlelight trading firm was already well developed, and its fame had already spread throughout the entire kingdom. It would not take long to accumulate 30,000 gold. While a sea of players was applying to join Zero Wing, the situation on the candlelight trading firm's side was also getting out of hand. Currently, White River City was flourishing. It was no longer inferior to Starmoon City. Moreover, during this period of time, the candlelight trading firm had begun selling equipment in large quantities, enjoying great popularity from the public. As for the overwhelming trading firm, it had already been left in the dust by now. Inside the lively candlelight trading firm, the various large guilds that had originally been planning to take advantage of Zero Wing's misfortune had all gathered here once again. This time, however, no one displayed the arrogance they had before, and they were all following the rules of the trading firm to the letter. Guild leader, do you really think Black Flame will be willing to meet us this time? Purple Eye asked as she looked at Galaxy Past. Since he has opened a trading firm, he will naturally want to do business. However, I am also not sure of Black Flame's personality. Previously, he challenged the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion without hesitation. This time he might really ignore us outright. Galaxy Past laughed bitterly. If I had known things would end up like this, I would have followed in Gentle Snow's footsteps before. I heard that Gentle Snow managed to purchase quite a number of intermediate mana armor kits, and they have long since made preparations to raid 50-man large-scale team dungeons. Not only had the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion suffered a crushing defeat, but Nine Dragons Emperor was also forced to bring the War Dragon Legion back to the pavilion's main headquarters to recuperate. If even the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion ended up in such a state, ordinary first-rate guilds like them stood no chance against Zero Wing at all. Now the only thing they could do was wait. Shortly after Shifeng began forging intermediate mana armor kits, Melancholic Smile entered his forging room. Guild leader, many upper managers from first-rate guilds have come to the candlelight trading firm. This time they wish to meet and have a proper discussion with you. When you will have the time to do so? Melancholic Smile asked softly. They're finally here? Shifeng stopped what he was doing. Revealing a faint smile, he said, let's head over there and take a look then. Chapter 561, Business. Overwhelming Smiles Guild Residence. Overwhelming Smiles' upper echelons currently filled the magnificent meeting room. Every one of them wore depressed expressions. Sitting at the head of the table, Feng Shenyang appeared utterly defeated. Zero Wing's victory over the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had dealt a psychological blow to every member of Overwhelming Smile. Originally, nobody had believed that Zero Wing could survive the Great War against the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Now, however, Zero Wing was like the sun at high noon, and many Overwhelming Smile members in White River City had already considered withdrawing from the guild. Ever since Overwhelming Smile began warring with Zero Wing, massive battles would ensue whenever the guilds met outside the city. Previously they had maintained a balance against Zero Wing, fighting on equal footing. Now Zero Wing suppressed them completely. Their morale wasn't the only thing that fell with each consecutive fight, their levels were decreasing rapidly as well. On the other hand, Zero Wing grew more valiant and stronger with every passing fight. Right now, Overwhelming Smiles members no longer dared don their guild's emblem when they left the city, deeply afraid that Zero Wing's members would recognize them. As a result of this depressing situation, many players had begun withdrawing from Overwhelming Smile. Why do I have such bad luck? Back in the day, I had been adamant about joining Overwhelming Smile. If I had known something like this would happen, I would have remained in Zero Wing. At the very least, I would have been a party leader there by now. I know, right? Even being a normal member would be fine, not to mention being a party leader. Many of Overwhelming Smile's members resting in the guild residence chatted among themselves. At this moment, the players that had defected from Zero Wing regretted their decision. It was especially true when they saw the Zero Wing members who had been less skilled when they left that could now defeat them easily. After only half a day, more than 3,000 Overwhelming Smile members in White River City had withdrawn from the guild due to Zero Wing's recruitment. One could just imagine how huge of a blow this was to Overwhelming Smile. However, the most damaging aspect was that more players considered defecting as time passed. Even some of Overwhelming Smile's middle managers began to express such inclinations. Do any of you have any ideas of what we can do about this? Feng Xianyang asked as he swept his gaze around the meeting room. However, none of the upper managers in the room answered Feng Xianyang's question. They remained silent. It was not because they did not wish to answer Feng Xianyang. Rather, they simply did not know what to say. Before this, their guild had recruited players in bulk and had even poached plenty of elite players from Zero Wing. Even now, their guild's member count greatly surpassed Zero Wing. However, when it came to an actual fight, they realized that having the advantage of numbers was of little to no use. Currently, whether it was in terms of levels or equipment, Overwhelming Smile was no match for Zero Wing at all. Even its momentum was significantly slower than Zero Wing's. What could they do in such a situation? Moreover, the war between their guild and Zero Wing was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much money they tossed into that hole each day, they could not fill it. If they continued this fight, they would eventually have to disband the guild altogether. A bunch of rubbish. Why do I even need you here? Feng Xianyang bellowed as he abruptly slammed his hand onto the table. Everyone in the room involuntarily lowered their heads, not daring to utter a single word. This won't do. I can't let things end just like this. Since the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion has suffered defeat, it will definitely try to restore its reputation. Think of a way to make contact with the pavilion. Feng Xianyang said, a bloody glow flashing in his eyes. Angrily, he declared, if Underworld and the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion join hands, I refuse to believe that we can't annihilate Zero Wing. Meanwhile, in the Candlelight Trading Firm's first-floor reception hall, the upper managers of various large guilds had waited, unattended, for a long time now. This time, however, none of them dared to complain. Suddenly, the doors to the reception hall opened. Everyone inside the room turned their gazes towards the entrance, discovering Shi Feng and Melancholic Smile entering the hall leisurely. Immediately, the upper managers of the various large guilds went up to Shi Feng and greeted him with friendly expressions on their faces. Their current attitude was completely different from what it had been in the past. I already know what your goal is by coming here. I can indeed sell you some intermediate mana armor kits. However, I have a condition. If you aren't interested in my proposal, then you may just leave, Shi Feng said straightforwardly, showing no signs of appreciation everyone's compliments. Haha. Guild leader Black Flame, please don't hold back. No one will complain even if you have 10 conditions, much less one. Galaxy Pass said, laughing. Right. Guild leader Black Flame, tell us what your condition is. As long as it is within our capabilities, we will do it. The branch leader of Emperor's Light followed up. The importance of intermediate mana armor kits to dungeon raids was extraordinary. Currently, although the various large guilds present no longer had many problems raiding 20-man team dungeons, 50-man team dungeons were still forbidden lands for them. Meanwhile, it was precisely because Gentle Snow had managed to obtain a large number of intermediate mana armor kits beforehand that she had gained the confidence to begin raiding a 50-man team dungeon. Ignoring all else, just the level 25 fine gold equipment and set equipment one could obtain already made a 50-man team dungeons quite attractive to guilds. Not to mention there were also various rare materials, forging designs and other items. In God's domain, if a guild wished to surpass others, what did they need? Wasn't it equipment? If one likened a 20-man dungeon to a treasure chest, then a 50-man team dungeon was a mountain of treasure. Meanwhile, the intermediate mana armor kit was the key to reaching this treasure mountain. Naturally, the various large guilds present wished to obtain this key. Even if they had to pay a price, they could easily earn it all back from the dungeons. Hence, the various large guilds were very eager to obtain the kits. My condition is very simple. You will purchase each intermediate mana armor kit for 7 gold and 100 magic crystals. This is a reasonable price, right? Shifeng laughed. Players could easily obtain magic crystals from any dungeon. Only the amount one could obtain varied with each dungeon. A party dungeon would drop very few pieces, while team dungeons would drop a little more. Currently, each magic crystal sold for around 2 or 3 silver. The reason for such a low price was mainly due to the fact that magic crystals had few uses. They were normally only used in alchemy processes. However, as guilds usually kept the magic crystals they obtained in their warehouses, it was not easy to purchase them on the market. Hence, Shifeng intended to trade for them. With a rough calculation, each intermediate mana armor kit would come to a total cost of 10 gold. This price was twice as high as the candlelight trading firm sold them for. Okay. No problem. Haha. Guild leader Black Flame, I have no issues with this condition. I wonder how many kits Guild leader Black Flame is willing to sell? The various guild representatives immediately revealed joyous smiles. None of them had expected for Shifeng to put forward such a cheap request. Currently, although the candlelight trading firm sold the intermediate mana armor kit for 5 gold per kit, on the black market however, they cost more than 10 gold each. Even then the demand for the kits still outstripped the supply. Now they could buy the kits directly for 10 gold each. Immediately, the upper managers of the various large guilds began voicing their requested volume. I want 120 kits. I want 300 kits. I want 150. Every one of these upper managers could not help but wish they could empty the candlelight trading firm's stock of intermediate mana armor kits. Among them, the Star Alliance was the richest, with Galaxy Pass purchasing 500 kits in one go. However, Shifeng did not possess that many kits on hand at all. Hence, he had everyone sign a contract with him requiring the pay up front. With the system bearing witness to the contract, no one worried about any potential issues. Over 100 guilds willingly handed over the money they owed. As for the magic crystals, they had already sent their subordinates to ship the crystals over. In just a short moment, Shifeng had earned over 30,000 gold. Of course, this profit did not come without a price. Shifeng was required to deliver the intermediate mana armor kits he owed within 5 days. Chapter 562, Divine Colosseum. After the upper managers of the various large guilds left the reception hall in high spirits, Melancholic Smile could no longer hold back as she asked, Guild leader, will it really be alright to sell so many intermediate mana armor kits to these guilds? It would have been fine if it were the basic strengthened armor kits. After all, the forging design for this item could be obtained through various means, so other forgers could produce them as well. However, the intermediate mana armor kit was different. Shifeng was the only person who could forge them, so the item's production was extremely limited. Moreover, they had only initially sold the intermediate mana armor kits with the intention of attracting business to the candlelight trading firm. Now that the candlelight trading firm's business has begun to take shape, there was no need to use the intermediate mana armor kits to attract more customers. By selling so many intermediate mana armor kits to other guilds, it would only serve to strengthen these guilds. This would just cause Zero Wing more trouble. Since we are a trading firm, why shouldn't we do business when the opportunity presents itself? Shifeng laughed. Not to mention I've already made a huge profit. I should at least allow others to pick up some scraps, right? Huge profit. Melancholic Smile was confused. If we sell the same amount of kits through the black market secretly, we will make more than what we just did. However, my goal isn't just to earn coins but also magic crystals. Shifeng explained, currently there are few uses for magic crystals. Moreover, they can only be obtained from dungeons. However, the various large guilds normally keep the magic crystals they obtained for themselves. So, if we had to point out who possesses the most magic crystals, it would have to be these large guilds. But the candlelight trading firm also has plenty of magic crystals. We even have an entire warehouse full of them right now. We have more than what we can use. Melancholic Smile grew even more confused. Have you forgotten the simulation device in the special forging rooms? Shifeng laughed. Immediately, Melancholic Smile's eyes glowed as she came to a realization. If one wished to use the simulation device, they needed to expend magic crystals. Meanwhile, the amount of magic crystals required varied depending on the materials simulated. The more precious a material was, the more mana crystals were required. A simulation device could allow a lifestyle player to familiarize themselves with the production flow of an item swiftly, significantly increasing their success rate and production speed when it came to the real deal. Compared to experimenting and wasting actual materials, it was much cheaper to spend magic crystals. Currently, the candlelight trading firm was developing in multiple cities. However, it severely lacked manpower, particularly advanced forging apprentices and basic forgers who were capable of producing advanced products. Despite the firm's efforts in recruiting lifestyle players from cities outside its sphere of influence, the number of players they had recruited was utterly insufficient. Currently, player demand for advanced products was growing exponentially. However, only basic forgers had a slightly higher success rate of producing items such as level 20 bronze and mysterious iron equipment. Advanced forging apprentices could not produce such items at all. As a result, the other trading firms throughout the entire God's domain were also desperately recruiting and poaching basic forgers. Unfortunately, becoming a true forger was easier said than done. If one wanted to nurture a group of basic forgers, the money required to do so could bankrupt an ordinary small guild. If the candlelight trading firm wished to quickly nurture a batch of advanced forging apprentices and basic forgers, utilizing the simulation device in the special forging rooms would be the cheapest way to do so. Only, the amount of magic crystals required to sustain the simulation device for so many people would be astounding. Considering the situation again, Melancholic Smile found that the amount of magic crystals the firm had stored away was indeed insufficient. Alright, in a moment, go and receive the magic crystals that those guilds have sent. I've also removed the restriction on the previously reserved special forging room. You can allow players with strong potential to train there. Saying so, Shifeng removed the restriction on the special forging room. Right, you should also purchase some magic crystals from time to time. However, make sure not to attract too much attention when doing so lest people start hiking up the prices. Guild leader, rest assured, I will send people to purchase them from other cities discreetly. I won't let others find out about this. Melancholic Smile nodded, smiling brightly. This was not the first time she had to do such a thing. Melancholic Smile then departed from the reception hall. I can only lie to her like this for now. Shifeng released a sigh of relief as he watched Melancholic Smile's departing figure. In reality, he had an even greater purpose for collecting magic crystals in bulk. The Divine Colosseum. That was where magic crystals were truly valuable. In the past, everyone had treated magic crystals as garbage as, at the time, only certain items required magic crystals to produce. Moreover, these items required very few to produce. Hence, players would normally celebrate if they managed to sell the magic crystals they had obtained. However, nobody could have imagined that, the moment the Divine Colosseum opened, the prices of magic crystals would instantly soar by over 6 times. The Divine Colosseum allowed players to examine their strength, and it allowed players to undergo training provided by the system to improve their weaknesses. Moreover, one could also obtain rewards from battles in the Divine Colosseum. The Divine Colosseum also had many other functions. Due to the emergence of the Divine Colosseum, the players of God's domain had obtained a systematic promotion ladder that allowed them to become experts quickly. Hence, the Divine Colosseum had been very popular among players. Players were required to pay a fee in order to use the Divine Colosseum. However, one could not use coins to make payments at the Colosseum, but magic crystals instead. Hence, prices of magic crystals skyrocketed upon the emergence of the Divine Colosseum. Even after a decade, magic crystals were still a powerful currency. They were worth as much as gold in reality. Otherwise, Shifeng would not have foolishly used intermediate mana armor kits to trade for magic crystals. If possible, Shifeng wished to turn all the coins in his possession into magic crystals. By the time the Divine Colosseum activated, the 30,000 gold in his hands would immediately become more than 100,000, or even 200,000 gold. However, in order to avoid attracting suspicion, he could only purchase them slowly and secretly. Over the following 2 days, Shifeng did not rest or log out of the game at all as he ceaselessly forged the intermediate mana armor kits. By the time he had cleared his debt, he had risen from level 30 to level 32. He had actually managed to level up twice in 2 days. Moreover, this was after he had reached level 30. If it were anyone else, they would not be able to rise by 2 levels even after grinding for a whole week. Meanwhile, Shifeng's forging proficiency had also risen to intermediate forger. During this period, both Zero Wing and the candlelight trading firm developed rapidly. It was especially true for Zero Wing. The guild's member count had finally broken past the 100,000 threshold, and it could finally be considered a large guild in the truest sense. On the candlelight trading firm's side, thanks to the simulation device, the firm had successfully nurtured several additional basic forgers during these past 2 days. As for the other guilds, they had also begun their competition over 50-man team dungeons. However, the thing that surprised everyone was that Overwhelming Smile had taken the lead, becoming the first guild to defeat the first boss in a 50-man hard mode team dungeon. As for Zero Wing, Aqua Rose's team had only been the second to defeat the first boss after relying on their superior equipment. The perceived failure had disheartened Aqua Rose. Shifeng was not surprised at all. Overwhelming Smile had the aid of War Wolf, as well as several other true experts. In terms of the number of top-tier experts, Overwhelming Smile was far above Zero Wing. Moreover, 50-man team dungeons relied more on a player's combat techniques than equipment. It was only natural for Aqua Rose's team to lose. It should be about time to turn in the quest. Shifeng looked at the coins that filled his pockets. He could not help but look forward to the quest reward given by the Starstreak trading firm. As one part of an epic quest, it had been extremely difficult. If he had not possessed the advanced book of magic, it would have been impossible for him to complete this phase of the quest. Chapter 563, Epic Treasure Chest. Just as Shifeng finished tidying up the intermediate mana armor kits he had forged and was about to head towards the Starstreak trading firm to complete his quest, Melancholic Smile suddenly rushed into the room, obviously agitated. Why the hurry? Did something big happen? Shifeng could not help but ask. People from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion are here. Melancholic Smile hurriedly said, they say they must meet with you. Moreover, they wish to hand you an item personally. They say that this item will be a huge help to you, and if you do not take a look at it, you will regret it in the future. Regret it, huh? Shifeng laughed. This Dragon Phoenix Pavilion truly is interesting. I've just defeated them and already they're sending gifts? Let's go see what they're up to then. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was a super first-rate guild. Although it had suffered massive losses in its war against Zero Wing, with the pavilion's background, it should have already recovered most of its losses. As for the possibility of the pavilion starting another war with Zero Wing, that was highly unlikely. Hence, the fact that someone from the pavilion had come looking for him confused Shifeng. He had no idea of what the pavilion was up to. After entering the reception room, Shifeng noticed that the pavilion had only sent one person to meet with him this time. However, the moment Shifeng saw this person he was immediately shocked. Why is she here? Shifeng looked at the girl, who approached him slowly, the scene of many legendary wars that occurred in his previous life surfacing in his mind. This woman was none other than the protagonist of those legendary wars, Phoenix Rain. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was split into 2 pavilions. One was the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion while the other was the Phoenix Pavilion. Of the 2, 9 Dragons Emperor controlled the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion, while Phoenix Rain managed the Phoenix Pavilion. Although 9 Dragons Emperor looked quite young, he had merely managed to retain his youth due to the technology of this era and exercise. In reality, 9 Dragons Emperor's real age had long since passed 35. Even so, the fact that 9 Dragons Emperor had been able to become the pavilion master of a super first-rate guild at the age of 35 showed that he was a promising talent. However, Phoenix Rain was even more amazing. Despite still being in her early 20s, she had already become the pavilion master of the Phoenix Pavilion. In the past, her deeds in the virtual gaming world had been legendary. As a result, the time when Phoenix Rain had reigned over the Phoenix Pavilion had been hailed as the pavilion's golden age. During that time, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had rapidly grown stronger. At present, Phoenix Rain was the reason that everyone considered the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion as a guild that was closest to becoming a super guild. Even the extraordinarily mysterious Great Pavilion Master of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was willing to allow Phoenix Rain to succeed him, becoming the Great Pavilion Master. Currently, Phoenix Rain wore a bright red mage's robe, the robe showcasing her exquisite figure. Every one of her actions carried an air of bewitchment, causing others to submit voluntarily. Hello, Guild Leader Black Flame. This young woman is known as Phoenix Rain, the Phoenix Pavilion Master of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Phoenix Rain beamed a flourishing smile at Shifeng. This smile alone had captivated Melancholic Smile, who stood beside Shifeng. As for Shifeng himself, however, other than his initial surprise at seeing Phoenix Rain, he did not react even in the slightest to the woman's mesmerizing smile. Seeing Shifeng's reaction, Phoenix Rain's smile became more pleasant as she said, "Guild Leader Black Flame, let's have a seat and chat properly, shall we?" Shifeng nodded, his mind very calm. He did not treat Phoenix Rain as if she were some unreachable existence. Shifeng's dull reaction was not because he had mental issues. Instead, his mind was far from ordinary. It was merely a smile. It was still not enough to make him blush or cause his heartbeat to quicken. "Phoenix Pavilion Master, you previously mentioned a gift for me and that I will regret it if I don't take a look. May I know just what kind of item Phoenix Pavilion Master offers me?" Shifeng smiled calmly. "Guild Leader Black Flame really is impatient. We've only just met, yet you're already so straightforward. I don't even know from where I should begin," Phoenix Rain complained as she sent Shifeng a resentful gaze. Sighing, she said, "However, since you've already asked, it would not be right to refuse." Phoenix Rain then took out a treasure chest that flashed with a purple glow, carefully placing it on the table. "Behold." The moment Phoenix Rain said so, Melancholic Smile, who sat beside Shifeng, was stupefied. "This is an epic treasure chest." Melancholic Smile dared not believe her own eyes. There were plenty of treasure chests in God's domain. However, the majority of them were common treasure chests. One would be lucky if they encountered a bronze treasure chest, whereas obtaining a mysterious iron treasure chest would make them rich. If one encountered a secret silver chest, they would become the envy of many. As for fine gold and dark gold treasure chests, Melancholic Smile had yet to see what they even looked like. Meanwhile, an epic treasure chest was a legend. The purple glow surrounding the treasure chest before her was indeed the glow effect unique to an epic ranked item. Hence, Melancholic Smile recognized it immediately. "Correct. This is indeed an epic treasure chest," Phoenix Rain said, her lips curled up into an enchanting smile. Unhurriedly she said, "Our Dragon Phoenix Pavilion encountered this item accidentally. In order to obtain this chest, we sacrificed tens of thousands of lives. I wonder if Guild Leader Black Flame is satisfied with this gift?" Phoenix Pavilion Master sure loves to joke. "I'm certain there is nobody in the entire God's domain who would not be tempted by an epic treasure chest. Naturally, I am no exception." Shifeng had also used omniscient eyes to appraise the treasure chest. There were no signs of forgery. This treasure chest before him was a bona fide epic treasure chest. Shifeng had only encountered dark gold treasure chests several times by chance. As for an epic treasure chest, this was also Shifeng's first time encountering one in this life in his past. In the past, Shifeng had never even heard of any news of epic treasure chests. That's right. He had not received even the slightest bit of information regarding epic treasure chests. Shifeng had even doubted that epic treasure chests existed in God's domain. Now that Phoenix Rain had brought an epic treasure chest as a gift for him, he wondered if he were dreaming. Dark gold treasure chests had a fixed chance of containing an epic item. What about an epic treasure chest, then? Shifeng did not even dare to think about it. At the very least, an epic item would drop. There might even be an extremely tiny chance that it might contain a complete legendary item. Legendary item. They were very limited in God's domain. In the past, every player who owned a legendary item was in existence ranked at the game's apex. Just owning the fragmented legendary ranked Heavenly Dragon's Breath had allowed Shifeng to have an unmatched advantage in terms of attributes. Even a monstrous existence like Martial Dragon was forced into a stalemate against him. Moreover, he had been unable to use any of his skills during that fight. If his skills weren't sealed, he could definitely beat the living daylights out of Martial Dragon if he activated Dragon's power. On the other hand, had Martial Dragon possessed a legendary item, Zero Wing would have definitely perished in the war before. I'm glad that it has attracted your attention. Initially, I was worried that Guild Leader Black Flame will not be satisfied with this. Phoenix Rain revealed an expression of relief. She looked nothing like a legend. Phoenix Pavilion Master, just tell me what you want. I don't believe that anyone would gift me an epic treasure chest for no good reason, Shifeng asked after calming down. Haha. Guild Leader Black Flame is indeed smart. There are no free lunches in this world. What I need Guild Leader Black Flame's help with is simple. I would not ask you to do something that will displease you. Moreover, this matter offers no harm, only benefits, Phoenix Rain laughed. However, I will require you to sign a contract before I can tell you. Otherwise, we will have to forget about this altogether. Only, it would be a pity for this epic treasure chest. Shi Feng fell silent. He could not understand just what Phoenix Rain was trying to do. Chapter 564, Demon Queen. Phoenix Rain did not grow anxious at the lack of response from Shi Feng. She simply sipped her black tea as she waited quietly for Shi Feng's answer. It was as if she were not afraid of Shi Feng rejecting her offer whatsoever. An epic treasure chest was incredibly precious. One could say that it was far rarer than an epic item. The Dragon Phoenix Pavilion had been lucky to stumble upon it by chance. To secure it, they had even paid a colossal price. As for what one could obtain from an epic treasure chest, even if an epic item with bad attributes dropped, its value would still be significant. There was no need to mention how much the chest would benefit a guild if it contained something even better than an epic item. Just using it as a gimmick would allow a guild's reputation to soar, not to mention letting an expert equip it and enter a dungeon. As there was a limited number of players allowed to enter a dungeon at a single time, the quality of players entering a dungeon would significantly impact the rating progression. If a guild allowed one of its experts to equip an epic item, the total damage of any team said expert joined would instantly rise to a whole new level. Naturally, the team's raid progression would be much faster than other guilds, having a significantly higher chance of obtaining the first clear of a dungeon. The team could also challenge dungeons that other guilds found impossible to raid. The amount of money one could save from the losses the team suffered while raiding the dungeon would be massive. No guild with any ambition would let this golden opportunity slip through their fingers, much less the extraordinarily ambitious Zero Wing. Can Phoenix Pavilion Master tell me the method to open this epic treasure chest? Shi Feng asked after pondering for some time. Although it was his first time seeing an epic treasure chest, he had not forgotten the treasure chest's traits due to his excitement. In God's domain, the higher ranked a treasure chest was, the more difficult it would be to open. Although Shi Feng had no idea how stringent the conditions were to open an epic treasure chest, he knew that even a dark gold treasure chest required a key. It was impossible that an epic treasure chest would have no requirements. The moment Shi Feng asked this question, Phoenix Rain could not help but carefully re-evaluate her opinion of Shi Feng. I did not expect Guild Leader Black Flame to remain so calm despite seeing an epic treasure chest. It would seem that Nine Dragons Emperor did not lose without reason, Phoenix Rain praised. Any ordinary person's first reaction when seeing a treasure chest would be to claim it for themselves. Even the guild leader of a first-rate guild, someone who had undergone the tempering of many storms, would grow excited should they encounter an epic treasure chest. It was simply impossible to stay calm. After all, the potential benefits one could gain from an epic treasure chest were almost limitless, so much so that it could be the turning point of a guild. Hence, how could anyone possibly stay calm when an epic treasure chest was within their reach? Yet, Shi Feng had not forgotten the fact that there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Indeed, just as Guild Leader Black Flame has surmised, there is a condition to open this epic treasure chest. However, this condition should not be difficult for a guild like Zero Wing to meet. Even if it isn't possible now, it will be in the future. It is only a matter of time. Phoenix Rain came clean without trying to hide anything. May I know what the condition is for opening this treasure chest? Shi Feng smiled bitterly. How could he not tell that Phoenix Rain was trying to hide something? This was an epic treasure chest. Just a dark gold treasure chest already required a dark gold ranked key to open it. However, a dark gold key was even rarer than the dark gold treasure chest itself. If an epic treasure chest required an epic key to open, Shi Feng could do without it. Phoenix Rain frowned slightly. She did not think Shi Feng would be so adamant for an answer. Although an epic treasure chest was indeed tempting, she had held the chest for a long time now. Unfortunately, she had no way to open it and could only stare blankly at the glowing chest. Otherwise, who would possibly use such a priceless item as a bargaining chip? However, she never expected that Shi Feng would not take her bait. Forget it. I believe that, if I don't tell you, you will most likely refuse to negotiate, Phoenix Rain sighed. Truth be told, the condition for opening this treasure chest is relatively simple. One only needs to gather 88 mana stones. I have investigated the mana stones somewhat. They only drop from 100-man dungeons with a certain probability. Of course, it will not be possible to gather 88 pieces within a short time. However, with 0 wing strength, collecting them will only be a matter of time, right? Mana stones? Shi Feng hurriedly suppressed the excitement in his heart, not daring to reveal it. I have also heard of this item before. However, I heard that they are extremely rare. Obtaining just one would require a tremendous amount of effort, let alone 88. At the very least, it would take several months to collect that many. Previously, in order to remove the seal on the Destroyer of Immortality, he had discovered a method to obtain mana stones that did not require raiding 100-man hard mode team dungeons. Although 88 mana stones was not a small amount, and he would be required to spend a lot of money, it was still much easier than trying to obtain them from 100-man dungeons, betting on that meager 2% drop rate. Guild Leader Black Flame, although you will only be able to open the treasure chest after 1 or 2 months, an epic item will still be extremely rare after that much time has passed. Not to mention, epic items aren't the only thing you can obtain from an epic treasure chest. If Guild Leader Black Flame obtains a legendary item, at that time, you will have truly made a fortune, Phoenix Raid hurriedly explained when she saw Shi Feng's disappointed expression. You are correct. However, Shi Feng muttered, revealing a troubled expression. However, when he saw Phoenix Rain trying her best to push the treasure chest onto him, he was inwardly exhilarated. Indeed, just as Phoenix Rain had said in the past, even after 3 months since God's Domain launched, dark gold items were still as rare as a phoenix's feather, not to mention epic items. Back then, only super guilds and a few extremely lucky guilds possessed epic items. As for fragmented legendary and legendary items, there had been no news whatsoever about these items. If Shi Feng could obtain an epic item in 3 months' time, he would make a huge fortune. After all, one could continue to use an epic item to a very high level. There was no need to worry about it becoming obsolete during the initial stages of the game. Guild Leader Black Flame, you should know that my request of you will not be difficult to complete. Moreover, it is something that will benefit you as well. I even offer you this epic treasure chest as a gift. Yet you still try to make excuses to put me off. Are you really that afraid that I will eat you up? Phoenix Rain smiled brightly, revealing a charming expression. Watching Phoenix Rain act in such a way, even Shi Feng felt his willpower faltering. She really is deserving her title as the Demon Queen, Shi Feng inwardly sighed. If anyone else stood in his place right now, Phoenix Rain might have conquered them already. Although Phoenix Rain appeared charming and gentle on the surface, her beauty and melodic voice capable of even toppling cities and countries, Shi Feng knew just how terrifying the woman was. If anyone dared write her off as a pinup, they must suffer some sort of brain damage. Even the insufferably arrogant Nine Dragons Emperor feared Phoenix Rain. After pretending to hesitate repeatedly, Shi Feng finally slapped his thigh and said, "All right then. I agree to your proposal. However, if the conditions you state are in any way unfavorable to Zero Wing or the Candlelight Trading Firm, I can only apologize to you in advance." I knew Guild Leader Black Flame would be a pleasant person to work with, Phoenix Rain hurriedly said. However, I don't want others to know about this matter, only you and I are allowed to know. May we move to a more private location? Okay, follow me then. Saying so, Shi Feng led Phoenix Rain to a VIP reception room. The room offered luxury and comfort. Moreover, it was also not possible for others to listen in on their conversation. Chapter 565, The Offer. The VIP reception room on the second floor was like an entirely different world. The rich fragrance of flowers and the chirping of birds filled the room. One could also see green mountains and blue creeks in the distance. The space inside this room looked just like the garden in paradise. As expected of a 2-star shop, it actually offers such an impressive location. Phoenix Rain expressed her admiration as she surveyed her surroundings. If Phoenix Pavilion Master likes it, you can easily obtain one for yourself. Although a 1-star shop has less space and available environments to choose from, this garden environment is also available in a 1-star shop, Shi Feng laughed. God's Domain was not considered a different world without reason. While nearly everything that could be found in the real world existed in God's Domain, things that did not exist in the real world could also be found here. In God's domain, the available activities were not limited to just killing monsters and leveling up. They could also enjoy a leisurely life here. However, the extremely realistic sensations that God's domain offered was not its most attractive aspect. Instead, it was the time dilation. This was the greatest scientific creation of mankind in this century, and only God's domain had managed to implement this function. No other virtual reality game had achieved this feat. This was also the main reason for God's domain's popularity. The flow of time in God's domain was twice as slow as that in the real world. In other words, God's domain's players could theoretically live twice as long as ordinary people in the real world. Moreover, activities such as learning, relaxation, and resting could all be done in God's domain. People could have more time to do what they wished inside the game world. In the real world, there were only 24 hours in a single day. An ordinary student like Shifeng would normally commit 5 or 6 hours of their day to study. Sleep also occupied roughly 9 hours. After deducting the time spent eating and other necessary activities to sustain one's life, a student like Shifeng would only have around 5 or 6 hours of free time. Meanwhile, each day in God's domain had 48 hours. In other words, a student in God's domain could possibly have up to 30 hours of free time, 5 times that of ordinary people. Who wouldn't want to live such a life? Not to mention, the main God system was constantly expanding the world of God's domain, allowing this virtual world to become more realistic, interesting, and mysterious. Who wouldn't be tempted by something like this? Guild leader Black Flame must be joking. Although I really wish to obtain a house like this for myself, unfortunately ordinary shops are no good. Such an environment is only available in luxury shops. Meanwhile, constructing a luxury shop requires 1,000 gold. I already wish I could spend 1,000 gold as if it were 2,000, so where would I possibly find so much money laying around to construct a luxury shop? Phoenix Rain shook her head, a hint of disappointment flashing in her eyes as she surveyed the room's elegance. Even large guilds had their own troubles to face. A small guild had few members, so it was relatively easy to manage. Thus, the guild required less money to sustain it. On the other hand, it was extremely complex to manage a large guild that had a large number of members. A super first-rate guild like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion was even more frightening. There were many aspects that required money. It was especially true during the initial stages of the game. It was like investing into a bottomless pit. Fortunately, guild residences allowed the pavilion to earn some money through guild quests. In addition, the trading firms and the raiding teams that had already taken shape had also begun to profit the pavilion, allowing them to invest less as a result. However, in terms of extravagance, no one throughout all of God's domain could compete with the Candlelight trading firm. Phoenix Pavilion Master, nobody will be able to listen in on our conversation here. You should be able to state your condition now, right? Although Phoenix Rain had presented herself weak all this time, Shifeng refused to believe that the woman was as simple as she made herself out to be. For just one simple condition, she had personally run all the way from the Black Dragon Empire to White River City and had even gifted him an epic treasure chest. Before I reveal it, I hope that you will first sign this confidentiality contract, Phoenix Rain said. She then revealed a contract that she had prepared, placing it on the table. Quite seriously, she said, "It is not that I do not believe Guild Leader Black Flame, but this matter is simply too important to take risks. If a third party discovered this situation, it would not benefit either of us." Shifeng picked up the contract and gave it a careful read. Indeed, it was a very common confidentiality contract. Under the surveillance of the main god system, it was impossible to reveal any secrets covered by a confidentiality contract in the game. Of course, the main god system could not control any leaks in the real world. "Aren't you afraid that I will reveal it outside of God's domain?" Shifeng asked. "I believe that Guild Leader Black Flame is an intelligent person, so please don't ask such a foolish question," Phoenix Rain said, her hand covering her mouth as she chuckled softly. "It was just a joke." Shifeng then signed the contract. The moment Shifeng finished his signature, the notification sound of the system immediately rang by his ears. System. Contract established. If either party violates the contract, the violator will be banished from God's domain. Although the system's female voice sounded crisp and pleasing, its words would give anyone goosebumps. Banished from God's domain. Moreover, there was only one condition. Any player who wished to live in God's domain would not dare violate this condition. After hearing the system notification, Phoenix Rain smiled at Shifeng as she said, In reality, my condition is very simple. I just wish to obtain a portion of the Candlelight Trading Firm's shares, but in my own name, not the Phoenix Pavilions, and even more so, not the Dragon Phoenix Pavilions. Of course, I will provide even more benefits. The simplest would be land for shops. You should know that reputation is required to purchase a good plot of land in every city. Although one can obtain it through subsales, the strategic plots of land in every city are not something an ordinary guild can obtain easily. Currently, Zero Wing might have secured the best plots of land available in Starmoon Kingdom's two largest cities. What about the important cities in other countries? If the Candlelight Trading Firm is to grow, it will require a larger market. I am sure that you will not be satisfied with just ruling over these two cities, right? I can provide this convenience. I can allow the Candlelight Trading Firm to obtain the valuable plots of land available in the main cities of many kingdoms and empires. In addition, I also have plenty of connections that can enable you to obtain raw materials cheaply, as well as provide you with the forging designs and recipes obtainable from dungeons. You won't have to worry about collecting and purchasing these things yourself. Of course, this matter will be carried out discreetly. I will not reveal my involvement. More importantly, I am not your enemy. Nine Dragons Emperor might have a grudge against you, but I do not stand with him. To be more precise, I stand with you. May I know what guild leader Black Flame thinks of my proposal? At this moment, Shifeng was silent. Phoenix Rain's proposal was indeed generous. A super first-rate guild's background was extraordinary. Compared to him, Phoenix Rain would have a much easier time obtaining the golden lands of the major cities in the various kingdoms and empires. Moreover, it was also impossible for him to get players of other kingdoms to resell their lands. Nobody would be so foolish as to give away their benefits to someone else, particularly to the Candlelight Trading Firm, a trading firm with massive advantages. Moreover, just as Phoenix Rain had said, she was not his enemy. On the surface, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion might seem like a single guild, but in reality the pavilion was two guilds joined as one. If not for that mysterious Great Pavilion Master maintaining the balance, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion might immediately break into two separate guilds. How many shares do you want? Shifeng asked. Since it is I who have come in search of guild leader Black Flame for cooperation, I will leave that decision up to you. Phoenix Rain giggled. I believe that, after seeing my sincerity, based on guild leader Black Flame's personality and reputation, you will not take advantage of this young lady, right? Chapter 566, Epic Treasure Chest Secured. Shifeng fell silent upon hearing Phoenix Rain's words. Negotiations were normal when one sought cooperation, and people would normally strive to obtain the greatest benefits for themselves. This might seem like a smart move, but contrary to popular belief, it placed one at a disadvantage. As neither side knew the other party's bottom line, the one to make the first offer would reveal their bottom line to their opponent. Moreover, after Phoenix Rain had said as much, how could he possibly take advantage of her? Even after a long moment, Shifeng did not answer. However, Phoenix Rain was not anxious in the slightest. On the contrary, she leisurely admired the scenery. 20%. What do you think? Shifeng finally said after pondering for some time. 20%? Phoenix Rain was stunned, looking at Shifeng as if saying, "Are you kidding me?" The connections the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion possessed were exactly what the trading firm needed most, as having a wide range of connections meant that more people would purchase the trading firm's products. Not to mention, the Candlelight Trading Firm would also get its hands on a large supply of raw materials, recipes, and forging designs. These were items that a trading firm lacked the most. Currently, although the Candlelight Trading Firm's range of influence had grown quite wide, it only had control over two truly useful cities. One was White River City, while the other was Starmoon City. If the Candlelight Trading Firm worked with her, it could spread its influence to dozens of major cities. The profit it could rake in at that time would surpass its current income dozens of times. Meanwhile, the only things the Candlelight Trading Firm could offer in this cooperation was coins and products such as the intermediate mana armor kits, light stones, and basic strengthened armor kits. Aside from that, there was nothing special about the Candlelight Trading Firm. Yet, Shifeng had only offered her 20% of the firm's shares. Normally, anyone else would willingly offer 50%, or even 60% of the firm's shares. That's right, 20%. This is the most that I can offer. If you cannot accept this amount, we can let it go at that, Shifeng said earnestly. Phoenix Rain did not know that before this, Shifeng's offer to Gentle Snow was only 15% of Zero Wing's shares. Moreover, this included the annexation of Ouroboros. Although Phoenix Rain could provide far more connections than Ouroboros, currently such things were unnecessary to Shifeng. Cooperating with Phoenix Rain would provide him with a massive advantage during the early stages of the game. However, at its core, a trading firm relied not on connections but on the products it sold. To become iron, the metal itself must be strong. Take the overwhelming trading firm for example. Even though it possessed more connections than the Candlelight trading firm, so what? If not for the Flame Dragon potion, the overwhelming trading firm would have long since lost its competitive edge. As long as a trading firm possessed a product unique to itself, there was no need to fear a lack of customers. For example, if the Candlelight trading firm sold an epic item, even players from other kingdoms and empires would willingly foot the exorbitant teleportation fee to visit the trading firm. Most importantly, the Candlelight trading firm possessed an advantage that no other trading firm possessed, and that was the special workshops available only in 2-star shops or above. With these workshops, the Candlelight trading firm could nurture a large number of forgers and other lifestyle players. Not only was this method efficient, but it was also cost-efficient. Although it was a good thing to have many connections, it would be meaningless if the trading firm could not keep up with production. It was like looking at a treasure chest that one could not obtain. Both the intermediate mana armor kits and the fire dragon potions had very low production volumes. The number of people that could actually purchase them was very low. The main reason behind the Candlelight trading firm's triumph over the overwhelming trading firm was mainly the common product known as light stones. Phoenix Rain's offer was only icing on the cake. The fact that Shifeng was willing to offer her 20% of the Candlelight trading firm's shares was entirely because of the future development potential between them, not because of the immediate profits. Guild leader Black Flame really is confident in the Candlelight trading firm. So I am relieved. Phoenix Rain smiled as she said, "All right then. Since I was the one who told Guild leader Black Flame to make the offer, I won't go back on my word. If it's only 20%, so be it. When the time comes, I will send someone discreet to contact you. In addition, I will also send you reports on the cities of other kingdoms and empires. If Guild leader Black Flame wishes to develop further in whichever city or require certain items, you can notify that person. That person will handle everything for you." Following which, the two signed a contract to seal the deal. Phoenix Rain's decisiveness had surprised Shifeng slightly. "Phoenix Pavilion Master, don't you feel that you are suffering a loss here?" Shifeng asked laughing. Any normal person would undoubtedly refuse such a seemingly harsh offer. They would choose to develop their own trading firm instead. At the very least, they would be in control of said trading firm. However, even after his firm statement, Phoenix Rain had accepted the offer without hesitation. "A loss?" Phoenix Rain shook her head. With an innocent gaze she said, "I don't feel that way at all because I can tell that you, Guild leader Black Flame, feel yourself suffering an even greater loss. To put it bluntly, even though I have clearly offered you such benefits, you still don't seem to care all that much and have offered me such a low price. The only reason I can think of for such a reaction is that the Candlelight trading firm is still hiding some secret that I do not know of, and that its true value is much higher than what I have offered you today. In that case, shouldn't I be even more accepting of your offer?" Phoenix Rain's words left Shifeng completely speechless. She was truly deserving her title as the Demon Queen. With her existence, it was no wonder why even super guilds had acknowledged the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion status. After Phoenix Rain quietly left, Shifeng looked at the epic treasure chest left behind by Phoenix Rain, a grin appearing on his face. He was fully capable of opening the epic treasure chest. Throughout this transaction, no matter how one looked at it, he was the one who had come out on top. If Phoenix Rain discovered this, she would certainly be disappointed. "I wonder what kind of item I can get from an epic treasure chest?" Shifeng muttered, anticipation growing in his heart. In his memories he had never even heard of an epic treasure chest. As for what he could obtain from one, he could only guess. Regardless of what item it would be epic ranked at the very least. However, how could a single epic item satisfy him? In order to reap the greatest benefit from this epic treasure chest, Shifeng decided not to open it immediately but to wait. The involvement of luck when opening a treasure chest was too significant to ignore. Currently, Icarus's heart was only dark gold rank, it had yet to reach its evolution limit. Moreover, he was only a short distance from upgrading the necklace to epic rank. With a little more time, he was confident that he could collect the remaining life force points required and upgrade the Icarus's heart once more. After all, Dark Gold rank was only the standards of mortals. Meanwhile, epic rank belonged to the extraordinary. There was a qualitative difference between the two. When the Icarus's heart reached epic rank, it would provide far more luck. His wisest option was to open the epic treasure chest at that time. The first thing he needed to do was collect plenty of magic crystals. The magic crystals required to produce 88 mana stones was no small number. Not to mention there was also the Divine Colosseum, which would reveal itself in the future. That place was a bottomless pit meant for devouring magic crystals. Following which, Shi Feng stored away the epic treasure chest and left the VIP reception room. He then headed towards the Starstreak trading firm. Originally, the Starstreak trading firm had been the most flourishing trading firm in White River City. However, with the rise of the Candlelight trading firm, the Starstreak trading firm's popularity had begun to roll downhill. Currently, the only reason that players still visited this place was to purchase some common products that only NPCs sold. Even so, the Starstreak trading firm still offered Shi Feng a lot of benefits. An NPC had established the Starstreak trading firm. Including White River City, it had shops in a total of 8 cities. Moreover, unlike player-owned shops, there was no city tax on the goods available in its shops. Hence, Shi Feng still sold some advanced goods at the Starstreak trading firm, though that was only limited to the shops located in cities without the Candlelight trading firm. "Your Excellency Yi Feng, you've arrived." Anna, who was currently busy with work, hurriedly greeted Shi Feng when she saw him enter the president's office. "Yes. Please notify President Henry and tell him that I have completed the task he entrusted me with." Shi Feng nodded in reply. He then said, "However, I want to change my remuneration." Chapter 567, Give or Take. As soon as Anna heard these words, she left the president's office to invite President Henry over. After watching Anna leave, Shi Feng examined the documents on the table. These documents were the business listings of the Starstreak trading firm's purchases, shipments and other such dealings. However, all of these dealings had been organized by Anna herself. Anna was an NPC who possessed 91 intelligence. Such NPCs were extremely rare in God's domain. If she became a guard, her potential would be nearly limitless. Hence, Shi Feng wished to negotiate with Henry. The quests that NPCs commissioned were not without room for change. It only depended on whether or not the player involved possessed the strength to make such changes. Previously, the reward they had agreed upon was a Tier 4 magic scroll that would allow him to reach the Dark Den easily and obtain the Bible of Darkness. However, Shi Feng felt that something was amiss. No matter how one looked at it, the task of managing the Starstreak trading firm was one part of an epic quest. The reward for completing it should not be limited to just the tool required to proceed to the next phase. If it were so, what's the difference between obtaining a reward and not obtaining one? Thus, Shi Feng felt that he could fight for more as there might be some mysteries hidden within. It was especially true for the assistant Anna. After the battle with the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, the various large guilds in God's domain had begun thinking of ways to obtain powerful NPC guards. However, how could powerful guards possibly be that easy to find? Take Anna for example. She was an extremely powerful guard. However, who would possibly believe that a weak and delicate young lady like her could become a guard with vast potential? If Shi Feng had not accidentally looked at Anna's attributes, he too would not have realized that she was so capable. If he allowed Anna to become an adventurer, with her intelligence she could reach astonishing heights. Although she would not be as powerful as Kite, she might still become a fine gold ranked guard. Dark Gold ranked guards were legends in God's domain. Based on Shi Feng's understanding, only a few people had managed to recruit Dark Gold ranked guards in the past. The guards owned by the majority of the players in the game were Bronze or Mysterious Iron rank. Even finding a secret Silver ranked guard was considered lucky, not to mention Fine Gold rank. Although a Fine Gold ranked guard was not invincible against enemies of the same tier and level, it was still significantly stronger than monsters of the same tier. Fighting players of the same tier and level would be even easier. Furthermore, Anna was a magical class. The majority of the NPCs in God's domain were physical classes. magical classes were very rare. Magical classes were different from physical classes. They could not be used against bosses and could only attack from the rear line. To a guild, however, a magical class's value far surpassed a physical class. Magical class NPCs knew plenty of AoE spells and possessed strategic level large-scale destruction spells. In a guild war or against field bosses, these NPCs were frightening existences. Hence, the various large guilds would usually prioritize magical class NPCs as their personal guards. Because of this, on the market, the value of a bronze-ranked magical guard could rival even that of a mysterious iron-ranked physical guard. If Anna were a fine gold-ranked magical guard, she would be no less valuable than Kite. No matter what, I must obtain Anna. Shi Feng grew excited just thinking about it. As a viscount, he only had 2 slots for personal guards. If he could fill those slots with a dark gold-ranked physical guard and a fine gold-ranked magical guard, a combination like that would have scared people to death in his past life. With the presence of these 2 personal guards, defeating a field boss of the same tier would be an effortless task. After Shi Feng had waited in the magnificent and grand president's office for some time, the dignified and elegant President Henry entered the room. However, behind President Henry was a level 180 tier 3 berserker. Shi Feng could not help but frown slightly. Whether it was among players or NPCs, a tier 3 class was considered a big shot. In White River City, such an NPC would be at the same level as an overlord. Although the Starstreak trading firm was one of White River City's top trading firms, it definitely could not afford to hire a level 180 Berserker King as a guard. Your Excellency Yi Feng, you have truly surprised me. I did not expect that you would actually complete this quest so quickly. Henry chuckled. Here, allow me to introduce you. This man beside me is the Berserker King Schneider. He is an expert our trading firm has invited from Starmoon City to annihilate the Black Scorpion Core. Greetings, Your Majesty Schneider, I am Yi Feng, an adventurer, Shi Feng introduced himself. In response, however, Schneider only glanced at Shi Feng without saying a word. He showed no signs of being interested in Shi Feng's acquaintance. However, Shi Feng was not bothered by Schneider's reaction. In truth, NPCs in God's domain were largely similar to real humans. A Tier 3 Berserker King NPC like Schneider was considered a powerful force in a city like White River City. On the other hand, Shi Feng was only a Tier 1 player. In Schneider's eyes, he was no different than an ant. Humans would not speak to ants. Schneider's attitude toward Shi Feng was normal. In the past, while Shi Feng had been working on a quest, even though he was a Tier 3 Sword King, a Tier 4 NPC had robbed him. One could say that Shi Feng had long since grown accustomed to such behavior. Of course, if Shi Feng were currently a Tier 3 player, Schneider would not be treating him so coldly. In the past virtual reality games, NPCs had always felt distant, detached. It felt as if NPCs and players lived in 2 different worlds. However, the NPCs of God's domain were different. They were extremely lifelike. If a player treated these NPCs as stupid and useless objects, then these NPCs would grant said player the full experience of passing through hell. May I know what Your Excellency wishes to discuss with me? Henry asked, not paying any heed to Shi Feng and Schneider's exchange. I want to make a deal with you, Shi Feng stated. Laughing, he continued, while I have been responsible for managing the Starstreak trading firm, Anna has helped me significantly. It was only because of her that I have lived up to your expectations and reached the goal of earning 30,000 gold. Hence, I now wish to recruit Miss Anna as my personal assistant. Naturally, I am willing to pay the appropriate price. Aside from the 30,000 gold you have requested, I am willing to offer an additional 3,000 gold. May I know what you think of this offer? Anna, who stood beside Shi Feng, was stunned, her delicate mouth parting as she stared at Shi Feng in disbelief. The advanced NPCs working at the trading firm only made a monthly salary of several gold. Yet, Shi Feng had offered 3,000 gold to poach her. Anna wasn't the only person who was shocked. Even Schneider, who had paid Shi Feng no mind, was awestruck. As a Tier 3 Berserker King, he had only been offered 1,000 gold to deal with the Black Scorpion Core. That was enough to allow him to purchase an epic item to increase his strength. Naturally, if he could recover the Starstreak trading firm's stolen merchandise, he could earn a bonus. Even then, however, he would not earn as much as 3,000 gold. At this moment, Schneider no longer looked at Shi Feng as if he were an ant. His gaze towards the lair had softened. Henry squinted his eyes as he evaluated Shifeng carefully. After a short moment he sighed, smiling as he said, "Your Excellency Yi Feng, it is not that I do not wish to let Anna go, but our Starstreak trading firm simply cannot do without Anna. Just like how Your Excellency has taken a liking to Anna's talent, it is only because of her that the Starstreak trading firm has its position today. Please forgive me for refusing your offer." 5,000 gold. Shifeng made a new offer without hesitation. To NPCs this was an astronomical price. Such an amount of money was sufficient for the Starstreak trading firm to hire several hundred advanced NPCs. This won't do. As you can see, Anna is responsible for so much daily profit. For the sake of the trading firm, I am afraid I cannot accept your offer, Henry said, his expression revealing his struggle. Merchants were all about profits. This held true in both the real world and the virtual world. 6,000 gold. I won't go any higher. If you still refuse my offer, I can only choose to hire Mr. Schneider beside you and have him take Anna's contract for me by force, Shifeng said as he looked at Schneider, grinning. Chapter 568, Epic Rank Tool. The moment Shifeng said these words, Schneider's eyes suddenly glowed. It was obvious that the Berserker King was tempted. The Starstreak trading firm had only offered him 1,000 gold as remuneration for getting rid of the Black Scorpion Corps. However, the captain of the Black Scorpion Corps was a Tier 3 expert. It would not be easy for him to secure a victory. Not to mention, the captain of the Black Scorpion Corps also had plenty of underlings. On the other hand, taking a single contract from the president of the Starstreak trading firm would be child's play, and the remuneration he would obtain was 6 times what the Starstreak trading firm had offered him. Sure enough, there is room for negotiation in this quest. Seeing Schneider's tempted gaze, Shifeng knew that he was in for a show. As one part of an epic quest, how could the final reward possibly be limited to a ticket leading to the next phase of the quest? Moreover, a Tier 3 NPC would be considered a big shot in whichever city they visited. Such a character would not appear in a small place like the Starstreak trading firm for no good reason. At this moment, Henry could no longer remain calm. Hurriedly he said, "Your Excellency Yi Feng must be joking. Since you are so sincere, I believe that Anna will have a better future if she follows Your Excellency." After Henry agreed, he immediately took out Anna's contract. Shifeng also handed over 36,000 gold without hesitation. This was all of the capital currently in his possession. If not for the candlelight trading firm and guild residents earning him quite a lot of money these past few days, he would not have had so many coins. After this transaction he was a pauper once more. However, Shifeng did not mind. Coins were meant to be spent. Otherwise, by the time players reached higher levels, the value of gold would depreciate. Moreover, this exchange had been a bargain. After all, he had only spent 6,000 gold to obtain a possible fine gold ranked guard. In the past, even mysterious iron ranked physical guards went for over 1,000 gold. The price was equivalent to an epic item of average quality. If it were a secret silver physical guard, that price would multiply by tenfold, reaching over 10,000 gold. Meanwhile, the cost for a secret silver magical guard would multiply by another 10. In other words, the value of a secret silver ranked magical guard was at least 100,000 gold. Even so, the supply of secret silver magical guards was practically non-existent. Anyone who discovered such guards would keep them for their own. Nobody would be so foolish as to give a secret silver magical guard away, to say nothing of fine gold ranked guards. After Shifeng obtained Anna's contract, the sound of a system notification rang out by his ears. "System, Anna's favorability towards you has increased by 30 points. Your Excellency Yi Feng, this is the Tier 4 magic scroll that President Henry promised you," Anna said as she revealed a tattered scroll surrounded by a flashing purple glow. Although the scroll looked worn, the magic power contained within caused even Schneider, a Tier 3 Berserker King, to palpitate with fear. There was even less of a need to mention Shifeng, who was only a Tier 1 Blade Saint. The power within a Tier 4 magic scroll was the equivalent of a full-powered blow from a Tier 4 class. It could easily and heavily injure a Tier 4 class. It could even wound a Tier 5 class, not to mention Tier 3 classes or ant-like Tier 1 classes. A magic scroll that has survived through the ancient times is extraordinary. It can practically rival the strength of an epic item. After receiving the scroll, Shifeng examined the item. Immediately he discovered just how powerful this Tier 4 magic scroll was. Shifeng had seen plenty of Tier 3 magic scrolls and had also used many before. However, this was his first time seeing a Tier 4 magic scroll. Normally, magic scrolls were consumable items. They would become useless after one use. However, this magic scroll that had been passed down from ancient times could be used multiple times. But there was a limit to how many times it could be used and conditions for each use. Position Teleportation Scroll, Tier 4 Magic Scroll. Allows player to move to any desired location, unable to teleport to certain special locations. Can be used a maximum of 10 times. After each usage, requires 5 mana stones to replenish the scroll's magic power. Cooldown, 3 days. Current uses 0/10. 10 uses. In other words, it was the equivalent of having 10 Tier 4 position teleportation scrolls. This magic scroll was even more valuable than an ordinary epic item. With this scroll, I can access areas that can't be reached with my current level. Shifeng stored the position teleportation scroll with a satisfied expression, overjoyed. As a reincarnator, he knew many secret locations throughout God's domain. Only he could not reach those locations due to the limitations of his current level. However, with this position teleportation scroll, he could easily travel to those secret areas that hid boundless treasures. God's domain was massive. The higher level a map was, the fewer teleportation magic arrays it would have. As for locations with bountiful opportunities and treasures, there were practically no teleportation arrays there. Players had to rely on their own 2 feet to reach these maps. God's domain's hidden maps were an example. The system map would not display these areas, and players had to uncover these secrets on their own. Every secret location was a huge treasure trove. It was the equivalent of a large field dungeon. A guild could raise its strength swiftly in these maps. Hence, scrambles over such secret locations had frequently happened in Shifeng's previous life. There were also many guilds that had risen to prominence due to these secret locations. However, it was not easy to travel to a secret location as one would encounter many dangers on their journey. Even an elite team had a high chance of facing complete annihilation, not to mention ordinary players. Only when players exceeded the level of these maps could they adventure to some low-level treasured lands. Meanwhile, with the position teleportation scroll, Shifeng could teleport directly to his target. Although he would still face plenty of danger after arriving, he would face significantly less than he would by traveling there on foot. After completing the quest, Shifeng did not hurry to complete the final phase of the epic quest Darkness Descends. Instead, he led Anna to the Adventurers Association. If players wished to recruit an NPC to serve as their guard, the NPC first needed an adventurer class. However, most of the NPCs in God's domain were ordinary people. They did not possess an adventurer class at all. Hence, if players wished to recruit such NPCs as their guards, they needed these NPCs to register at the Adventurers Association. At the same time, they were also required to select a specific class for these NPCs, allowing them to learn and train to become an adventurer. Only then could these NPCs become a player's guards. At this time, Shifeng entered the Adventurers Association's main hall. Despite it being daytime right now, there was still a large number of players present. A simple glance told Shifeng that there were several hundred players here. Of course, these players had not come to the Adventurers Association because they had too much time on their hands. They had all come here specifically for their NPC guards. Due to Zero Wing's famous battle, many players had discovered a never-before-seen road to success. Even if their personal strength was lacking, they could nurture a guard to improve their own strength. If a player wanted to recruit a personal guard, they had to become a baron in their city first. They would then obtain 1 slot to recruit a personal guard. However, a lot of time was required to become a baron, and many players could not wait that long. Hence, they would first look for some NPCs they thought highly of and try to deepen their relationship with these NPCs. That way, by the time their reputation reached a sufficient amount, they could immediately reach out to these NPCs and recruit them as their guards. In God's domain, the higher tiered an NPC was, the more difficult it would be for a player to deepen their relationship with said NPC. Of all the NPCs in God's domain, ordinary civilians were the easiest to form a relationship with. However, it was not easy for the inhabitants of God's domain to become adventurers. If a player could help an ordinary civilian become an adventurer, their relationship with said NPC would deepen significantly. Fortunately, players had that ability. Only whether an NPC was actually capable of becoming an adventurer depended on their own potential and attributes, and this was information that players had no access to. In addition, players had a limited number of recommendations per week. After using up their recommendations, they had to wait another week before their chances refreshed. Therefore, when choosing ordinary NPCs, a player's foresight was extremely important. If a player was unlucky, they could only search for other NPCs. If they were lucky, then they could begin deepening their relationship with said NPC earlier. There sure are a lot of people here. Shifeng could not help but laugh bitterly when he saw the long line of over 100 players. This could be considered a form of digging his own grave, right? Chapter 569, SSS Rank. The Adventurers Association's review of an NPC's ability to become an adventurer was a tedious one. The first evaluation was of the NPC in question's various attributes, followed by a test for the NPC's suitability of the various classes. Only after these two tests were complete could the Adventurers Association determine whether an NPC was suited to become an adventurer or not. In total, each NPC's review lasted roughly 2 minutes. Watching players happily enter the testing room with their chosen NPCs and leave in tears made many of the players in line grow anxious. Isn't the success rate a little too low? Out of the 20 people I have seen enter the testing room, only one came out with a successful result. And even then, the strength of that person's NPC was only mediocre. It really makes you wonder how Zero Wing managed to obtain such a powerful NPC, a male cleric with a pointed nose said, sighing. It is possible that Zero Wing recruited an NPC who was already an adventurer to begin with. My teammates had already come here to recommend their own NPCs. However, only 3 of the chosen NPCs became adventurers, though they received low ratings. They don't really have any significant potential, a burly male berserker complained. Unfortunately, nobody on my team is even a baron, so we can't recruit any guards or see the NPC's exact data. We can only confirm their standards based on the evaluation. I heard that the best guard Overwhelming Smile has managed to recruit is only Mysterious Iron rank. I wonder if the NPC that spent more than half a day searching for will become an adventurer? If it's a success, I'll make a fortune. The players queuing up to have their chosen NPCs tested discussed Zero Wing's guard, Kite. They all hoped that they could luck out and encounter an NPC like him as well. At that time, luxury cars and beautiful ladies would be within their grasp. This was not an exaggeration. The various large guilds purchased powerful guards through the virtual trade center at astronomical prices. Even bronze guards sold for 100 gold or so, whereas mysterious iron guards sold for 500 gold. As for secret silver rank, the price would multiply by tenfold. If those coins were converted to credits, it was enough to allow an ordinary person to live the rest of their lives without working. However, even now, no one had offered any mysterious iron guards for sale, much less secret silver. A moment later, a ranger left the testing room with an excited expression. Loudly flaunting to his own party members, he said, "Ha! Let's head to the Rose Bar. I'll treat everyone to a cup of ice fire wine." Rose Bar was one of White River City's high-class bars. Meanwhile, the ice fire wine was a must-try drink, and it was extremely popular among players. However, the drink was not cheap, with each cup costing 10 silver. Even elite players only occasionally ordered a cup to sate their addiction. If they drank a cup every day, they would become a pauper very quickly. "Sure, but what was your test result?" one of the ranger's teammates asked curiously. "My NPC can become an adventurer. Moreover, he even obtained a B-rank rating for the Shield Warrior's evaluation. They say he'll become a powerful Shield Warrior in the future." The ranger boasted. "Lucky. This is by far the highest rating I've heard of. Our party's success will rely on you in the future," an elementalist said excitedly. The watching crowd looked at the ranger enviously when they heard about his NPC's B rank. They could not help but wish they could snatch the ranger's chosen NPC for themselves. Unfortunately, the main god system had long since set it so that the NPCs that had been recommended by a player would receive protection. Within 10 days, no other player could increase their favorability with the NPC in question. Hence, it was not possible to steal an NPC from another player. A period of 10 days was enough to allow a player to deepen their relationship with an NPC significantly. If one worked hard, they could even accumulate sufficient reputation and become a baron. Normally, in order for an NPC to become an adventurer, they needed to receive a D-rank rating or higher on a particular class. B-rank rating? Shifeng could not help his surprise. In truth, the evaluation given by the Adventurers Association's test could not completely determine an NPC's potential. It was only a rough estimation. It was just like how one would receive a pass on a test, but in reality the passing mark for the test ranged between 60 and 100 marks. The same principle applied to the Adventurers Association's test. The test was very general, so the final results would not always be accurate. It could only determine the upper limit of an NPC's potential, not their actual potential. Normally, NPCs that received a D rank would end up a common guard with limited growth potential. These NPCs were not worth the time it took to nurture them as personal guards. Only D rank NPCs who were specialized in certain attributes could become bronze guards. However, the chances of finding those NPCs were very low. In other words, a D rank NPC's potential ranged between common and bronze rank. However, only after these NPCs became guards would one know their exact growth potential. Meanwhile, C rank NPCs could become mysterious iron guards. As for B rank NPCs, they had a strong chance of becoming bronze guards and a certain probability to become mysterious iron guards. There was also a relatively good chance for B rank NPCs to become secret silver guards. Unless one had somehow offended the main god system in their previous lives, there was almost no chance for a B rank NPC to end up a common guard. Of course, A rank stood above B rank. Extremely few NPCs would receive this rating. Even in his previous life, Shifeng had never personally encountered an NPC who had received an A rank. An NPC with an A rank was a dragon or phoenix among men. As for an A rank NPC's potential range, it was between bronze and fine gold rank. In the past, out of all the NPCs he had recommended, the highest rating he had obtained was B rank. After recruiting said NPC as his guard, he fortunately had ended up with a secret silver guard. This time, however, Shifeng already knew Anna's base attributes. Based on his guard's attributes in his previous life, Shifeng was sure that Anna would receive a very high rating. "Lord Viscount, I apologize for the long wait. Please follow me," the test officer said respectfully after glancing at Shifeng. A Viscount was already a grand noble in White River City. They were far more powerful than ordinary nobles. Not only could they recruit 50 ordinary guards, but they also had 2 slots for personal guards. Shifeng nodded and followed the test officer into the testing room. "Lord Viscount, based on the Adventurers Association's rules, each test will cost you 10 silver. As my lord is a Viscount of White River City, you can enjoy a 20% discount, so my lord only needs to pay 8 silver per test," the test officer explained uneasily as he arrived before the test apparatus. "Here." Shifeng readily handed over 8 silver coins, inwardly cursing the Adventurers Association. Magic crystals powered the test apparatus. How much was a magic crystal worth on the market? Moreover, each magic crystal could be used dozens of times. Yet, the Adventurers Association charged 10 silver for every test. In other words, the Adventurers Association earned a profit of dozens of times the actual cost. It was far more profitable than any other industry. However, it was due to the fact players were required to spend money on many aspects of the game that allowed the coins of God's domain to remain extremely rare and valuable. Following which, Anna walked up to the test apparatus and began her potential evaluation. Time seemed to crawl by. However, even after 2 full minutes had passed, the test apparatus had yet to produce a conclusion. On the contrary, due to the test apparatus consuming too much power, the test officer had no choice but to replace the magic crystal powering it. 1 crystal. 2 crystals. In the end, Anna's test used a total of 5 magic crystals. At this moment, the test officer had also turned pale. Meanwhile, the result displayed showed that Anna was suited to become a summoner, and her rating for the class was SSS rank. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.